Welcome back to another episode of Infidelity Tales Lab. We're thankful for your continued viewership. Before we begin, tell us, where in the world are you watching from? We love knowing our global reach. Now, let's dive into today's story. Chapter 1. The Foundation Cracks. Trevor Daniels had built his life like a fortress, methodical, calculated, and impenetrable. At 42, he owned 3 successful auto repair shops across the city, each one a testament to his relentless work ethic and razor-sharp business mind. His calloused hands told the story of a man who'd crawled from the trailer parks of Alabama to suburban prosperity through sheer determination and an almost frightening ability to hold grudges. The scar running from his left temple to his jaw served as a permanent reminder of his father's drunken rage. The night 17-year-old Trevor had finally fought back and won. He'd left home that same night, never looking back, never forgiving. That was Trevor's way. Cross him once, and you were dead to him forever. Candace had been different, or so he'd thought. When they'd met 15 years ago at a charity car show, she was a 25-year-old social worker with honey blonde hair and a laugh that could melt steel. She'd approached his vintage Mustang display with genuine curiosity, asking technical questions that impressed him. Most women pretended interest in his cars. Candace actually understood them. Their courtship had been a whirlwind. Within 6 months, she was pregnant with twins, Aiden and Brooke. Trevor had proposed immediately, not out of obligation, but because he genuinely believed he'd found his partner for life. The wedding had been modest, but perfect, held in his shop after hours with their closest friends celebrating among the smell of motor oil and chrome. Now, 16 years later, their suburban home in Millbrook felt like a museum of manufactured happiness. Family photos lined the hallways, camping trips to Lake Tahoe, Christmas mornings, graduations, and birthdays. Trevor had provided everything. The 4-bedroom house with a white picket fence, private school tuitions, family vacations to Europe. He'd worked 60-hour weeks to give them the life his own father never could. But something had shifted in recent months. Candace had become distant, her phone constantly buzzing with text messages she'd quickly hide. She'd started working late more often, citing difficult cases at the social services office. When Trevor would try to initiate intimacy, she'd claim exhaustion or stress. Their conversations had reduced to logistics. Who was picking up Aiden for basketball practice? What time Brooke's dance recital started? Trevor's instincts, honed by years of dealing with dishonest customers and unreliable suppliers, had begun sending warning signals. He'd learned to trust his gut completely. It had saved him from bad business deals and dangerous situations more times than he could count. But this time, he'd pushed the doubts aside. This was his wife, the mother of his children, his partner in building their American dream. That trust had been his mistake. The call came at exactly 3:17 a.m. on a Tuesday night in October. Trevor had been sleeping deeply after a particularly exhausting day dealing with a problematic engine rebuild. The piercing ring of his cell phone jolted him awake, his hand instinctively reaching for the nightstand. Trevor Daniels? The voice was unfamiliar, professional, with a slight southern accent. Who is this? Do you know what time it is? My name is Richard Kowalski. I'm an attorney representing your wife in what I believe will soon become divorce proceedings. Trevor sat up in bed, his blood turning to ice. Beside him, Candace continued sleeping, her breathing steady and peaceful. What the hell are you talking about? Mr. Daniels, I'm calling because there's something you need to know before tomorrow's official filing. Your children, Aiden and Brooke, they're not biologically yours. The words hit Trevor like a physical blow. He stood up, walking to the window, his legs suddenly unsteady. You're lying. I wish I were, sir. DNA tests were conducted 3 weeks ago. The results are conclusive. Neither child shares your genetic material. Trevor's vision blurred momentarily. 16 years of bedtime stories, little league games, helping with homework, teaching Aiden how to change oil, watching Brooke's first dance recital. Every memory felt suddenly contaminated, poisoned by this revelation. Who? The word came out as a growl. Paul Morrison. Your wife's relationship with him began approximately 18 years ago and never ended. Paul Morrison. The name hit Trevor like another punch. Paul had been his best friend since childhood, the best man at his wedding, godfather to the twins. Paul, who came to every family barbecue, every birthday party, who'd helped Trevor move into this house. Paul, who'd comforted Candace when Trevor's grandfather died last year, who'd been there for every major moment of their marriage. "You're lying," Trevor repeated, but his voice lacked conviction. "I'm texting you the DNA results now, Mr. Daniels. I'm sorry you had to find out this way, but Mrs. Daniels felt you deserved to know before the papers are served." The phone buzzed in Trevor's hand. He opened the message and saw the official letterhead, the clinical language, the percentages that prove his entire life had been built on lies. Probability of paternity, 0%. Trevor stood in his bedroom, looking at his sleeping wife, and felt something inside him break. Not his heart, that had been hardened by too many betrayals in his life. What broke was his faith in his own judgment, his belief that he could trust anyone completely. He thought about Paul's frequent visits, his insistence on spending time with the kids, his recent divorce from his own wife Lisa just 6 months ago. How many times had Trevor joked about Paul being like a second father to Aiden and Brooke? How many times had Candace volunteered to help Paul through his difficult time after the divorce? The laughter that escaped Trevor's throat was cold and bitter. He'd been the fool, the cuckold, the joke that everyone was in on except him. But as he stood there in the darkness, looking at the woman who'd stolen 16 years of his life, Trevor felt his old nature reasserting itself. The same ruthless streak that had built his business empire, that had severed ties with his abusive family forever, that had never forgiven a single betrayal in his entire life. Candace and Paul had made the mistake of thinking Trevor Daniels was soft, that he'd simply accept this humiliation and move on. They were about to learn what happened to people who betrayed Trevor Daniels. He grabbed his keys from the dresser, moving with the silent precision of a predator. There would be no confrontation tonight, no dramatic scene. Trevor had learned long ago that revenge was a dish best served with careful planning and perfect execution. As he walked to his truck, Trevor's phone buzzed again. Another text from the lawyer. "Mrs. Daniels and Mr. Morrison are currently at 1247 Elm Street. I thought you should know." That was Eleanor Hartwell's address, Candace's mother. Trevor started his engine and began driving through the empty streets, his mind already calculating possibilities, planning moves like a chess grandmaster. By the time this was over, Candace and Paul would wish they'd never been born. The foundation of Trevor's life had cracked tonight. Now it was time to bring the whole house down on everyone who'd betrayed him. Chapter 2. The Discovery. The drive to Eleanor Hartwell's house took Trevor through the quiet streets of Millbrook's historic district, where Victorian homes sat like sleeping giants under ancient oak trees. His hands gripped the steering wheel with surgical precision, his breathing controlled despite the hurricane of rage building inside him. This was how Trevor operated. Ice-cold calculation wrapped around molten fury. Eleanor's house at 1247 Elm Street was a testament to old money and older secrets. The 3-story Victorian had been the Hartwell family for 4 generations, its gingerbread trim and wraparound porch hiding decades of family drama behind lace curtains and polite society manners. Trevor had always felt like an outsider here, the working-class husband who'd never quite measured up to Eleanor's standards for her precious daughter. Now, as he parked across the street and studied the house, Trevor understood why Eleanor had always looked at him with barely concealed disdain. She'd known. She'd known from the beginning that her grandchildren weren't his, and she'd watched him pour his heart and wallet into raising another man's offspring while smiling to his face at every family gathering. The house was dark except for a single light in the upstairs master bedroom, Eleanor's room. But parked in the circular driveway were 2 cars Trevor recognized, Candace's silver BMW and Paul's black pickup truck. The sight of them together, brazenly displayed at her mother's house, sent a fresh wave of rage through Trevor's system. He sat in his truck for nearly an hour, watching and planning. This wasn't just about catching them in the act. Trevor needed intelligence, leverage, ammunition for what was coming next. He'd learned patience in the military before starting his business, learned that the best attacks came after careful reconnaissance. Finally, movement caught his eye. The front door opened, and Paul Morrison stepped onto the porch, stretching like a man who'd just woken up. Even from across the street, Trevor could see the casual comfort in Paul's movements, the easy familiarity with the house that spoke of frequent visits. Paul lit a cigarette and stood smoking in the cool night air, completely unaware he was being watched. Trevor studied his former best friend with new eyes. Paul had always been the smoother one, the charmer who could talk his way into anything. In high school, Paul had been a quarterback while Trevor worked in the auto shop. They'd bonded over their shared love of cars and their dreams of escaping their dead-end town. When Trevor had started his business, Paul had been there with encouragement and startup capital. When Paul's own construction company had failed 5 years ago, Trevor had offered him work and friendship without question. Looking at Paul now, Trevor wondered how long this betrayal had been planned. Had Paul always coveted Candace? Had their entire friendship been a lie designed to keep Trevor close while Paul stole his life piece by piece? The front door opened again, and Candace emerged wearing a silk robe Trevor didn't recognize. She moved to Paul's side with an intimacy that made Trevor's jaw clench. They spoke in whispers, their body language screaming decades of hidden romance. When Paul pulled her close and kissed her neck, Candace laughed, the same musical laugh that had captivated Trevor 16 years ago. But it was what happened next that made Trevor's blood run cold. The porch light flickered on, and Eleanor Hartwell stepped outside. Instead of the outrage or shock one might expect from discovering her daughter with another man, Eleanor smiled warmly and handed Paul a cup of coffee. The three of them stood together like a family, comfortable and natural in their deception. Eleanor reached up and touched Paul's face with the affection of a mother-in-law who'd always preferred him to Trevor. The gesture was small but devastating. It proved this wasn't a recent affair, but a long-term relationship that had Eleanor's full blessing and support. Trevor's phone buzzed with a text from Candace. "Working late tonight. Don't wait up. Love you." The casual cruelty of the lie, sent while she stood in her lover's arms, crystallized something inside Trevor. This wasn't just adultery. It was a coordinated campaign to humiliate and deceive him while stealing his money, his children, and his future. He took photos with his phone, documenting the scene with the same methodical precision he brought to everything else. But evidence for a divorce wasn't enough. Trevor wanted more than legal victory. He wanted complete and total destruction of everyone who'd betrayed him. As he prepared to leave, Trevor noticed something else that sent chills down his spine. Through the upstairs window, he could see two figures moving around, Aiden and Brooke. His children, no, Paul's children, were there too, part of this family gathering he'd never been invited to join. The realization hit him like a physical blow. This wasn't just about Candace and Paul's affair. The entire family structure he'd thought he was part of was an illusion. Eleanor's house was their real home, their real family gathering place. Trevor had been the outsider funding their real life while living in a carefully constructed lie. He thought about all the times Candace had taken the kids to visit Grandma Eleanor, all the family traditions he'd been excluded from with polite excuses about work schedules and prior commitments. Every holiday gathering, every family photo, every tender moment he'd been pushed to the sidelines while Paul played the real father figure. Trevor started his truck and drove home through streets that now felt foreign and hostile. His own house, when he pulled into the driveway, looked like a museum display, beautiful and empty, a stage set for a play he'd never been meant to star in. Inside, he poured himself 3 fingers of bourbon and sat at his kitchen table, staring at the photos on his phone. The loving family scene at Eleanor's house mocked every assumption he'd built his life around. But as the alcohol burned through his system, Trevor felt his old instincts taking over. He'd survived his father's brutality by being smarter and more ruthless than his enemies. He'd built his business empire by outworking and outthinking his competition. Every challenge in his life had been overcome through careful planning and relentless execution. Candace, Paul, and Eleanor thought they'd destroyed him tonight. They had no idea what they'd actually done was awaken something they should have left sleeping. Trevor Daniels had never lost a war he'd chosen to fight, and this war was going to be unlike anything they could imagine. By dawn, Trevor had filled 3 notebooks with plans, timelines, and contingencies. He'd identified every weakness in their defenses, every asset they thought was safe, every relationship they valued. The lawyer who'd called him had inadvertently provided the opening move in what would become the most comprehensive campaign of destruction Trevor had ever orchestrated. Candace and Paul thought they'd won by revealing their secret. They were about to learn that some victories come with a price too terrible to imagine. Chapter 3: The War Begins. Trevor didn't go to work the next morning. Instead, he sat in his kitchen drinking coffee and watching Candace perform her morning routine with the clinical detachment of a predator studying prey. She moved through their house with the practiced ease of someone living a perfectly scripted lie, making breakfast, chatting about the weather, kissing his cheek goodbye with lips that had been on another man just hours before. "Late meeting tonight," she said, adjusting her earrings in the hallway mirror. "Might not be home until after 10. Another lie delivered with Academy Award conviction. Trevor nodded and smiled, playing his part in their grotesque theater. "I'll leave dinner in the fridge." After Candace left, Trevor called his 3 shop managers and told them he was taking a personal week. Then he drove to a part of town he rarely visited, the kind of neighborhood where people minded their own business and asked few questions. Frank Castellano's private investigation agency operated out of a strip mall between a pawn shop and a tattoo parlor. Frank was a 60-year-old ex-cop who'd lost his badge for excessive force, but gained a reputation for results that stayed off official records. Trevor had met him 5 years ago when a business partner had tried to steal from him, and Frank had provided evidence that destroyed the man's life completely. "Trevor fucking Daniels," Frank grinned, standing up from behind his cluttered desk. "I wondered when you'd darken my door again. Someone steal from you." "Something like that," Trevor said, settling into the cracked leather chair across from Frank's desk. "I need a complete background investigation. Financial records, travel patterns, communication logs, employment history, medical records, family connections, everything." Frank pulled out a yellow legal pad. "Who are we looking at?" "My wife, Candace Daniels, her lover, Paul Morrison, and her mother, Eleanor Hartwell." Frank's pen stopped moving. In 30 years of private investigation, he learned to read people's motivations with surgical precision. The man sitting across from him wasn't looking for closure or evidence for a divorce settlement. Trevor Daniels was planning a war. "This is going to cost you, and I mean serious money. The kind of deep dive you're talking about, the kind that gets into sealed records and protected databases. That's not cheap." "Money isn't a concern," Trevor said, sliding a bank cashier's check across the desk. "I want to know everything. Every secret, every weakness, every mistake they've ever made or try to hide. And I want it done quietly." Frank looked at the check, $50,000. More than enough to buy silence and thoroughness in equal measure. "What's the timeline?" 2 weeks. After that, I start phase 2. "And what's phase 2? Trevor stood up, straightening his jacket. "You don't want to know, Frank. You really don't want to know." From Frank's office, Trevor drove to his lawyer's office downtown. Mitchell Gray had been handling Trevor's business affairs for 8 years, guiding him through acquisitions, contracts, and the occasional lawsuit. Mitchell was expensive, connected, and completely without moral scruples when it came to protecting his client's interests. "Trevor," Mitchell said, gesturing to the chair across from his mahogany desk, "I heard about the situation. I'm sorry." "No, you're not," Trevor said calmly. "You're calculating billable hours and wondering how much this divorce is going to cost me. So let me save you some time. I'm not getting divorced." Mitchell's eyebrows rose. "I'm not sure I understand." "Candace thinks she's going to divorce me and take half my assets while moving in with her lover. She's miscalculated badly." Trevor leaned forward. "I want you to quietly liquidate some of my holdings and move the money offshore. Nothing illegal, nothing that raises flags, but I want my core assets protected before she makes her move." "Trevor, I have to advise you that hiding assets during divorce proceedings. She hasn't filed anything yet. Until she does, I'm simply reorganizing my portfolio." Trevor's smile was cold as Arctic wind. "I also want you to research the legal ramifications of paternity fraud. 16 years of child support payments obtained through deception. I want to know if I can sue for every penny back. Mitchell made notes, his legal mind already working through possibilities. What else? I want to buy some property. Industrial land outside the city limits. Somewhere remote, somewhere private. Money's no object, but it needs to be done through shell companies. Multiple layers of ownership that can't be traced back to me. May I ask what for? Trevor stood up. Client privilege, Mitchell. Some things are better left unasked and unanswered. That afternoon, Trevor visited his eldest shop manager, Carlos Rodriguez. Carlos had been with Trevor for 12 years, starting as a mechanic and working his way up to manager through loyalty and competence. More importantly, Carlos had grown up in the same neighborhoods as Trevor, understood the same harsh rules about betrayal and respect. Boss, Carlos said, looking up from the engine he was rebuilding. Thought you were taking time off. I am. That's why I'm here. Trevor motioned Carlos into the office behind the shop floor. I need a favor, Carlos. A big one. Name it. I need you to find me some people. The kind of people who know how to make problems disappear quietly. The kind who don't ask questions and don't leave witnesses. Carlos's expression didn't change, but his eyes hardened slightly. In his youth, before Trevor had hired him, Carlos had run with some dangerous crowds. He'd left that life behind, but the connections remained. This about your wife? Among other things. Carlos nodded slowly. These kinds of people, they don't come cheap. And once you go down this road, I've been down darker roads than this, Trevor interrupted. The question is whether you're with me or against me. You saved my life when you hired me, gave me a chance when nobody else would. I'm with you until the end, boss. Whatever you need. Good. I need introductions, not services. Not yet. But when the time comes, I want options. That evening, Trevor sat in his study going through family photo albums while Candace was at her late meeting. Every picture felt like evidence in a criminal case. Birthday parties where Paul stood too close to the children. Family vacations where Paul had been mysteriously available to join them. Christmas mornings where Paul's gifts to Aiden and Brooke had been more thoughtful than Trevor's own. His phone rang at exactly 10:30. Candace, calling from the office. Hi, honey. Meeting ran super late. I'm going to stay at Mom's tonight instead of driving home exhausted. Another lie, delivered with the same casual ease. Trevor could hear Paul's voice in the background, probably didn't realize he was audible. Of course, Trevor said. Drive safe. Love you. Love you too. After hanging up, Trevor poured himself a drink and called Frank Castellano. It's only been one day, Frank said without preamble. I need you to accelerate the timeline. Money's no object. Hire whoever you need to hire, bribe whoever you need to bribe, but I want preliminary results in 72 hours. What changed? They're moving faster than I anticipated, which means I need to move faster too. Trevor hung up and opened his laptop. Over the next 6 hours, he created a detailed spreadsheet tracking every asset, every relationship, every vulnerability in his enemies' lives. By dawn, he had identified 17 different pressure points he could exploit, 12 relationships he could destroy, and 8 financial levers he could pull to bring their world crashing down. Candace thought she was playing chess while Trevor was playing checkers. She was about to learn that Trevor Daniels didn't just play chess. He invented new rules while the game was in progress, rules that would leave his opponents utterly destroyed. The war had begun, and Trevor intended to be the only survivor. Chapter 4. Gathering Intelligence. Frank Castellano's preliminary report arrived 72 hours later in the form of a thick manila envelope delivered by a courier who'd asked no questions and left no traces. Trevor read it in his locked office at the main auto shop, each page revealing layers of deception that went deeper than he'd imagined. Candace's affair with Paul Morrison hadn't begun 18 years ago. It had begun 20 years ago, before she'd ever met Trevor. Their relationship had been serious enough that Paul had proposed, but Candace had broken it off when she discovered Paul's gambling problem and mounting debts. She'd met Trevor 6 months later at the charity car show, pregnant with Paul's children and looking for a stable provider. The DNA results confirmed what Trevor already knew, but Frank's investigation revealed something worse. Candace and Paul had never really ended their relationship. They maintained contact throughout her marriage to Trevor, their affair resuming whenever Paul's life stabilized. The most recent reconciliation had begun 2 years ago when Paul had finally gotten clean from gambling and started his new job in construction management. Eleanor Hartwell hadn't just known about the affair. She'd been its facilitator and financier. Bank records showed regular transfers from Eleanor's trust fund to both Candace and Paul, including a down payment on Paul's new apartment 6 months ago. Eleanor had been funding their separate household, while Trevor unknowingly subsidized their family life. But the most damning discovery was a series of emails between Candace and a divorce attorney dated 3 months earlier. She'd been planning Trevor's destruction for months, calculating asset division, researching alimony claims, and strategizing how to maximize her settlement while minimizing Trevor's custody rights. The emails revealed a cold, calculating woman who viewed Trevor as nothing more than a financial resource to be exploited and discarded. Paul Morrison's background revealed a different kind of betrayal. His construction job was legitimate, but Frank had uncovered something interesting. Paul was working on a major commercial development project, one that would require significant auto repair services for the construction fleet. Services that Paul had steered away from Trevor's shops and toward a competitor owned by Candace's cousin. Trevor had been systematically excluded from business opportunities within his own extended family network, his financial contributions taken while his professional expertise was deliberately undermined. The psychological profiles Frank had compiled painted a picture of calculated manipulation spanning nearly 2 decades. Candace wasn't just an unfaithful wife. She was a sophisticated con artist who'd identified Trevor as the perfect mark and executed a long-term strategy to extract maximum value while maintaining her primary relationship with Paul. Trevor finished reading the report as the sun set outside his office window. He'd known his wife was cheating, but discovering the scope and duration of her deception was like learning his entire adult life had been an elaborate theatrical performance designed to rob him blind. He called Carlos into his office and shared the relevant portions of Frank's report. "Jesus, boss," Carlos said, shaking his head. "This is worse than I thought. What's the play?" Phase 1 is gathering more intelligence. I want to know their daily routines, their meeting places, their communication patterns. Everything. Trevor opened his desk drawer and pulled out a small digital device. Frank provided some interesting toys. Tracking devices, audio surveillance, digital monitoring equipment. All legally gray, but not technically illegal if deployed correctly. You want me to plant these? I want you to coordinate with Frank's people. Professional surveillance, professional equipment, professional results. We're going to map their entire operation before we strike. Carlos nodded. And Phase 2. Trevor's smile was arctic. Phase 2 is where things get creative. That weekend, while Candace took the children to visit Eleanor, officially, and Paul, unofficially, Trevor visited the industrial property Mitchell Gray had purchased through shell companies. 200 acres of abandoned warehouse, space 40 minutes outside the city, surrounded by chain-link fence and completely isolated from neighbors or casual observers. The main warehouse was a relic from the 1970s, its concrete floors and high ceilings perfect for Trevor's purposes. He spent the day taking measurements, planning renovations, and envisioning how the space would serve his ultimate goals. On Monday morning, Trevor visited his bank and liquidated another $1 million in assets, transferring the money to offshore accounts Mitchell had established. Then he drove to a meeting with someone Carlos had introduced him to, a man who called himself Vincent and asked no questions about names or motivations. Vincent operated out of a legitimate security consulting firm, but his real expertise lay in acquiring items and services that existed in legal gray areas. For the right price, Vincent could provide equipment, expertise, and personnel for situations that required absolute discretion. "Your friend Carlos says you need some specialized assistance," Vincent said, his office decorated with military memorabilia and framed photos of security deployments in various global hotspots. "I need to renovate a warehouse space for some private business activities. The work needs to be done quietly, by people who don't keep records or ask questions." "What kind of renovations?" Trevor handed Vincent a detailed set of architectural drawings he prepared over the weekend. Soundproof rooms, reinforced construction, specialized lighting and ventilation, underground storage areas, security systems that couldn't be monitored by outside agencies. Vincent studied the plans with professional interest. This is specialized construction, the kind that requires specialized workers and specialized silence. Money's no object. Timeline is 4 weeks. This is going to cost serious money. 7 figures. Trevor handed him a cashier's check. That's a down payment. You'll get the rest when construction is complete and tested to my specifications. Vincent looked at the check, $500,000, and nodded slowly. I'll have crews here tomorrow. They'll work nights, use cash, and forget this place exists when they're done. That evening, Trevor sat in his study reviewing Frank's expanded surveillance reports. The intelligence picture was becoming clearer. Candace and Paul maintained a regular schedule of meetings, communications, and financial transactions that revealed a parallel life completely separate from anything Trevor had known about. They met Tuesday and Thursday evenings at Eleanor's house, usually arriving separately and staying overnight. Weekend visits always included the children, creating family gatherings Trevor was never invited to attend. Paul had keys to Eleanor's house and his own room there, complete with personal belongings and family photos that included himself but excluded Trevor. The financial records showed a sophisticated money laundering operation designed to hide assets and income from Trevor's potential discovery. Eleanor's trust fund disbursements were structured to avoid triggering reporting requirements, while Candace's spending patterns indicated she was maintaining 2 separate households with Trevor's money. Most significantly, Frank had discovered that Candace and Paul had already signed a lease on a house across town, a 4-bedroom family home they planned to move into immediately after serving Trevor with divorce papers. The lease was scheduled to begin in 6 weeks, suggesting their timeline for destroying Trevor's life was accelerating. Trevor closed the surveillance files and opened his laptop. Over the next 3 hours, he updated his master plan with new intelligence, adjusting timelines and targeting strategies based on his enemy's revealed patterns and weaknesses. Phase 2 would begin in 2 weeks, once the warehouse renovations were complete and all surveillance assets were in place. But before the main event, Trevor had some preliminary moves to make. Strategic strikes designed to destabilize his targets and create the psychological conditions necessary for their complete destruction. Candace, Paul, and Eleanor thought they were playing a long game, systematically dismantling Trevor's life while building their own. They had no idea that Trevor was playing a deeper game entirely, one where their victory would become the foundation of their absolute annihilation. The hunter had become the hunted, but they didn't know it yet. Chapter 5. The Setup. 2 weeks later, Trevor's warehouse had been transformed into something that would have impressed military special operations planners. Vincent's crews had worked with clockwork precision, installing soundproof walls, reinforced steel doors, industrial-grade ventilation systems, and underground storage areas accessible only through hidden panels. The facility now contained everything Trevor would need for the final phase of his plan, including some capabilities he hoped he wouldn't have to use. Frank's surveillance operation had provided a complete intelligence picture of his target's movements, communications, and vulnerabilities. Trevor now knew that Candace and Paul planned to serve him with divorce papers in exactly 10 days, timing their attack to coincide with the end of the school year when they could immediately relocate the children to their new house. But Trevor had decided not to wait for their move. It was time to begin destabilizing their carefully constructed plans. The first strike came on a Tuesday morning when Paul Morrison arrived at his construction site to discover that his crew's equipment had been vandalized overnight. Every piece of machinery had been sabotaged in ways that wouldn't be immediately apparent but would cause catastrophic failures within hours of operation. Nothing traceable to Trevor, but professional enough to suggest someone with serious mechanical expertise had orchestrated the attack. The equipment failures cascaded throughout the week, causing massive delays on Paul's project and triggering penalty clauses in his construction contract. By Friday, Paul's company was facing a $100,000 loss and potential bankruptcy. a problem that would disappear if someone with automotive expertise helped repair the sabotage machinery. Trevor's second move was more subtle but equally devastating. Through shell companies and intermediaries, he began acquiring dead instruments and business relationships throughout Candace and Paul's extended network. A mortgage held by Eleanor's bank, credit lines used by Paul's struggling business, service contracts with the private school Aiden and Brooke attended. Within a week, Trevor controlled significant financial leverage over every aspect of his enemies' lives, though they remained completely unaware of his invisible influence over their economic foundations. The third move was psychological warfare. Trevor began leaving subtle evidence that he knew more than he was admitting. A Paul Morrison business card left on the kitchen counter, casual mentions of Eleanor's recent family gatherings during dinner conversation, innocent questions about Candace's late work meetings that included details only surveillance could have provided. The effect was to create paranoia and suspicion among his targets without giving them any concrete evidence of Trevor's knowledge or intentions. Candace became increasingly nervous. Paul started looking over his shoulder, and Eleanor began insisting on more security measures for their clandestine meetings. But Trevor's masterpiece was the fourth move, one that required patience, timing, and absolute precision. Through Vincent's contacts, Trevor had arranged for Paul Morrison to be offered a lucrative construction contract in another state. The offer came from a legitimate company with an excellent reputation, but the contract was structured to require Paul's immediate relocation to oversee a year-long project. The financial terms were too good to refuse, but accepting would mean leaving behind his relationship with Candace and the children just as their divorce plans were reaching fruition. Trevor had created a classic dilemma. Paul could choose financial security or personal relationship, but not both. Either choice would destabilize the conspiracy against Trevor and provide openings for further manipulation. The surveillance reports showed the stress fractures beginning to appear. Candace and Paul's meetings had become tense, their conversations increasingly focused on disagreements about timing and strategy. Eleanor had begun questioning whether their divorce plans were moving too quickly, suggesting they needed more time to prepare for Trevor's potential responses. Trevor's systematic pressure campaign was working exactly as designed, creating doubt, fear, and conflict among his enemies while positioning himself as an invisible puppet master, controlling their choices and reactions. On Friday evening, Trevor received a text from Candace canceling their weekend plans due to a family emergency at Eleanor's house. Instead of the anger or suspicion such a message might have provoked a month earlier, Trevor felt only satisfaction. The surveillance equipment he'd had installed at Eleanor's house would record whatever crisis meeting they were holding, providing him with real-time intelligence about their changing plans and psychological states. That night, Trevor sat in his study listening to audio feeds from Eleanor's house through high-end headphones. The conversation was everything he'd hoped for and more. "Something's wrong," Candace was saying, her voice tight with stress. "Trevor's been different lately. He knows things he shouldn't know." "You're being paranoid," Paul replied, but his tone suggested he was equally concerned. "We've been careful." "Careful." Eleanor's voice was sharp with anxiety. "Paul's business is falling apart. Trevor's asking strange questions. And now this job offer that's too convenient to be coincidental. Someone's playing games with us." Trevor smiled in the darkness. They were beginning to understand they were under attack, but they had no idea who was attacking them or how comprehensive his intelligence and preparation had become. Their paranoia was justified, but their responses were predictable and vulnerable to further manipulation. "We need to accelerate the timeline," Candace continued. "Serve the papers next week instead of waiting." "That's exactly what we can't do," Eleanor argued. "If Trevor suspects something, rushing the divorce will confirm his suspicions and put us at a disadvantage." Trevor listened to them debate strategy and timeline, each argument revealing more about their planning process and psychological vulnerabilities. They were scared, confused, and beginning to turn on each other, exactly the mental state Trevor needed them in for phase 2 of his plan. He opened his laptop and began updating his operational timeline. The warehouse was ready, The surveillance network was providing perfect intelligence. His financial and legal preparations were complete, and his enemies were destabilizing themselves through fear and uncertainty. It was time to move from setup to execution. In 72 hours, Trevor would initiate the final phase of his plan, a sequence of events that would transform Candace, Paul, and Eleanor from confident conspirators into broken victims begging for mercy they would never receive. Trevor Daniels had spent a month preparing for war. Now it was time to win it. Chapter 6: The Trap. Sunday evening arrived with unseasonable warmth for October, the kind of weather that made people leave windows open and take unexpected walks. Trevor had spent the day at his warehouse, conducting final equipment tests and reviewing his operational plans with the methodical precision of a surgeon preparing for a complex operation. At 7 p.m., he activated the first phase of his endgame. Paul Morrison's phone rang while he was having dinner with Candace and the children at Eleanor's house. The caller identified himself as the site's supervisor for the out-of-state construction project, reporting a catastrophic equipment failure that required Paul's immediate consultation. Without his expertise, the caller explained, the project would shut down for weeks, costing millions and destroying Paul's company's reputation forever. Trevor listened to the call through surveillance equipment, watching Paul's face via hidden cameras as the pressure mounted. The emergency was completely fabricated. Vincent's people were exceptionally skilled at creating convincing crises, but Paul had no way of knowing that. I have to go, Paul told Candace, his face pale with stress. This could bankrupt the company. You can't leave now, Candace protested. We're supposed to meet with the lawyer tomorrow about the divorce papers. This is more important than your divorce, Paul snapped, the pressure finally causing cracks in their relationship. If I lose this contract, we won't have any money to fight Trevor anyway. Trevor smiled, watching their argument escalate through his cameras. Nothing destroyed conspiracies faster than financial pressure and conflicting priorities. Paul left Eleanor's house at 8:30 p.m., driving toward the interstate and the fabricated emergency that would keep him occupied for the next several hours. Phase 1 was complete. Paul had been isolated from his support network and was being drawn into Trevor's preferred operational area. At 9 p.m., Trevor activated Phase 2. Candace's phone received an encrypted message that appeared to come from her divorce attorney. Emergency meeting required. Evidence suggests Trevor knows about affair. Meet at alternate location to discuss strategy. Come alone. The message included an address in the warehouse district. Not Trevor's facility, but a legitimate office building where Vincent's people had established a temporary legal consultation service complete with authentic documentation and professional appearances. Trevor watched Candace's reaction through hidden cameras as she read the message. Her face went white, her hands shaking as she showed the text to her mother. I have to go, Candace told Eleanor. If Trevor's found out about us, I need to know how bad this is. It's too dangerous, Eleanor protested. What if this is a trap? A trap set by who? Trevor doesn't know about the lawyer, and nobody else knows about our plans. Trevor nearly laughed out loud. His enemy's inability to imagine the scope of his intelligence operations was making his job considerably easier. Candace left Eleanor's house at 9:45 p.m., driving toward what she believed was a meeting with her attorney, but was actually the first stage of her abduction. Vincent's people would intercept her en route, using professional techniques to convince her she was being taken into protective custody due to threats against her safety. At 10:30 p.m., Trevor activated Phase 3. Eleanor's doorbell rang, and through her security cameras, she saw two men in expensive suits holding official-looking identification. They claimed to be federal investigators working on a financial crimes task force, following up on suspicious banking activities connected to Eleanor's trust fund disbursements. The men were actually Vincent's operatives, but their credentials were perfect forgeries backed by authentic-looking paperwork and badge numbers that would check out if Eleanor tried to verify them. Their story was that someone had been using Eleanor's financial information to launder money through shell companies, and they needed her cooperation to prevent her from being charged as an accessory. Eleanor, already paranoid from the evening's events, invited them inside for what she believed would be a routine interview. Instead, she found herself agreeing to accompany them to a secure location where she could provide testimony away from potential surveillance by the criminal organization allegedly using her accounts. By midnight, all 3 targets were in Trevor's custody, though none of them understood the true nature of their situation yet. They believed they were dealing with separate emergencies: business crisis, legal emergency, federal investigation, having no idea these events were connected or orchestrated by Trevor. The warehouse facility where they were ultimately transported had been designed to look like a legitimate government safe house. Multiple rooms, professional security equipment, official-looking documentation, and personnel who maintained their cover identities with Academy Award-level conviction. Trevor didn't reveal himself immediately. Instead, he let them spend several hours in separate rooms, each believing they were in protective custody or emergency consultation, their stress and confusion building as their individual crises seemed to escalate beyond their control. At 3 a.m., Trevor finally made his entrance. He walked into the central conference room where Vincent's people had assembled all 3 targets, his appearance ending their confusion and replacing it with absolute terror. Candace began hyperventilating. Paul's face went ashen, and Eleanor simply stared in shock at the man they'd spent months planning to destroy. "Good morning," Trevor said, settling into a chair across from them with the casual ease of someone completely in control. "I believe we have some things to discuss." The soundproof room absorbed Candace's scream, and Trevor's smile never wavered. After a month of careful planning and patient execution, the real conversation could finally begin. His enemies were exactly where he wanted them: isolated, terrified, and completely at his mercy. Now, they would learn what happened to people who betrayed Trevor Daniels. Chapter 7: The Reckoning. The conference room in Trevor's warehouse facility was designed to break people psychologically before any physical persuasion became necessary. Harsh fluorescent lighting, uncomfortable steel chairs, walls lined with surveillance monitors showing empty corridors and locked doors. Most importantly, complete sound isolation that made screaming pointless while allowing normal conversation to carry the weight of absolute privacy. Trevor had changed into military-style clothing: black tactical pants, combat boots, and a plain black t-shirt that showed the muscular build he'd maintained through decades of physical labor. This wasn't the suburban businessman his prisoners had thought they knew. This was the predator they'd awakened. 20 years, Trevor said, his voice calm and conversational. 20 years of lies, theft, and betrayal. 20 years of watching me love children who weren't mine, while you laughed at my stupidity behind my back. Candace was sobbing, her carefully maintained facade of suburban respectability completely shattered. Paul sat rigid with terror, finally understanding the magnitude of his miscalculation. Eleanor maintained her aristocratic composure, but her hands shook as she gripped her chair. "Trevor, please," Candace began, but Trevor held up a hand for silence. "I'm going to explain how this works," he continued. "You're going to listen, you're going to confess everything, and then you're going to pay for what you've done. The alternative is considerably less pleasant." He pressed a button on a remote control, and the wall-mounted monitors came alive. The screens showed surveillance footage from months of watching them: intimate moments between Candace and Paul, financial meetings with Eleanor, conversations about divorcing Trevor and stealing his assets, even footage of family gatherings where they'd celebrated holidays together while excluding him. "I know everything," Trevor said. "Every lie, every theft, every moment you thought you were safe. I know about the offshore accounts, the shell companies, the business deals you steered away from my companies. I know about the house you're planning to move in next week, and I know about the custody strategy designed to keep me away from children I spent 16 years loving." Paul finally found his voice. "Trevor, man, we can work this out. It doesn't have to be like this." Trevor's laugh was ice cold. "Work it out. You stole my wife, my children, my money, and 16 years of my life. You were my best friend, and you betrayed me every single day for 2 decades. There's no working this out, Paul. There's only paying the price." Eleanor tried to maintain her authority. "This is kidnapping, Trevor. You can't." "I can do whatever I want," Trevor interrupted. You're 40 miles from civilization in a facility nobody knows exists, held by people who don't exist on any official records. I could keep you here forever, and nobody would ever find you. He stood up and walked to a cabinet, retrieving a leather portfolio filled with documents. But I'm not a monster. I'm a businessman, so I'm going to offer you a choice. Trevor placed the documents on the table. Option 1. You confess everything on video, transfer all stolen assets back to me, sign custody documents giving me full rights to Aiden and Brooke, and agree to disappear from their lives permanently. In exchange, I let you live. And option 2, Eleanor asked, though her voice suggested she didn't want to know. Option 2 is why I built the soundproof underground storage areas, Trevor said simply. The threat hung in the air like a physical presence. These people had underestimated Trevor Daniels completely, thinking he was a soft suburban businessman who would accept their betrayal and move on with his life. They were discovering that the man they tried to destroy was far more dangerous than they'd ever imagined. The confessions will be detailed, Trevor continued. I want dates, amounts, methods, co-conspirators. I want the complete story of how you planned to destroy my life, starting from the day you decided to use me as your financial provider while maintaining your real relationship. He activated a professional video camera mounted on a tripod. Candace, you're first. Start with when you discovered you were pregnant with Paul's children and decided to find a reliable husband to support them. I can't, Candace whispered. Trevor's expression didn't change, but he pressed another button on his remote control. Through the conference room speakers came audio of Aiden and Brooke laughing, children's voices that had been the center of Trevor's world for 16 years. Those children are going to grow up either knowing their mother cooperated with justice, Trevor said, or wondering why she disappeared without explanation. Your choice. The psychological pressure was devastating. Trevor wasn't just threatening their lives. He was threatening their relationships with the children they'd stolen from him. The same children whose love had been Trevor's greatest joy and deepest wound. One by one, they broke. Candace confessed first, her video testimony revealing the calculated nature of their deception with devastating clarity. She'd identified Trevor as a suitable provider after Paul's gambling addiction had made him an unreliable partner. Their marriage had been a business arrangement designed to extract maximum financial support while maintaining her real relationship with Paul. Paul's confession was even more damaging, revealing the systematic way he'd undermined Trevor's business interests while pretending friendship. He'd steered contracts away from Trevor's shops, shared confidential business information with competitors, and actively sabotaged Trevor's professional relationships within their extended network. Eleanor's testimony revealed the scope of the financial conspiracy, including detailed records of money transfers, asset hiding strategies, and the coordination required to maintain their parallel family structure for 2 decades. By dawn, Trevor had comprehensive video confessions, signed legal documents transferring all contested assets to his name, and custody agreements that would make him the children's sole guardian. More importantly, he had complete psychological dominance over 3 people who would never again threaten his interests or relationships. But Trevor wasn't finished. The confessions and legal documents were just the foundation for the real punishment he'd planned. Now comes the interesting part, Trevor said, his smile holding no warmth whatsoever. You're going to disappear. The final phase of Trevor's plan would ensure that Candace, Paul, and Eleanor could never threaten him again, while sending a message to anyone else who might consider betraying Trevor Daniels in the future. The reckoning was complete, but the punishment was just beginning. Chapter 8. The Punishment. Trevor's punishment phase began with the systematic destruction of his enemies' identities and social connections. Using the confessions they'd provided, along with evidence Frank Castellano had gathered over weeks of surveillance, Trevor orchestrated a campaign of public humiliation that would leave them friendless, unemployed, and completely isolated. The first step was financial annihilation. Using the legal documents his prisoners had signed, Trevor gained access to their bank accounts, investment portfolios, and credit lines. Within 48 hours, every asset they possessed had been either transferred to his name or liquidated to pay fabricated debts to shell companies he controlled. Paul Morrison's construction business collapsed overnight when Trevor called in the loans he'd secretly acquired. Candace's credit was destroyed through coordinated attacks on her financial history. Eleanor's trust fund was frozen pending investigation of the money laundering activities she'd confessed to on video. But financial destruction was just the appetizer. Trevor's main course was social obliteration. He released carefully edited portions of their video confessions to select members of their social and professional networks. Candace's colleagues at the Social Services Office learned about her systematic deception and theft. Paul's construction industry contacts received evidence of his fraudulent business practices. Eleanor's country club friends discovered her role in facilitating 2 decades of adultery and financial crime. The effect was devastating. Candace was fired from her job and blacklisted from social services work throughout the state. Paul's construction license was revoked pending investigation. Eleanor was expelled from her country club and shunned by the social circles that had defined her identity for 60 years. Trevor didn't stop with their immediate networks. He systematically contacted their extended families, former colleagues, and casual acquaintances, providing evidence that destroyed every relationship they'd built over their lifetimes. Within a week, all 3 were completely isolated, their reputations so thoroughly destroyed that rebuilding would be impossible. But social and financial destruction weren't enough for Trevor. He wanted them to experience the same helplessness and fear he'd felt when learning about their betrayal. The psychological warfare continued with a campaign of surveillance and intimidation that made them understand they were being watched constantly. Trevor's people would appear wherever they went: the grocery store, gas stations, medical appointments. Never threatening, never speaking, just there. Constant reminders that Trevor's reach was unlimited and his attention was permanent. Their phones received calls at random hours, sometimes silence, sometimes audio of their own conversations played back to them, sometimes just breathing before the line went dead. Mail was delivered to addresses where they no longer lived. Their few remaining acquaintances received anonymous packages containing evidence of additional crimes and betrayals. The message was clear: Trevor owned their lives completely, and there was nowhere they could hide from his influence. 3 weeks after their confessions, Trevor made his final move. Candace received a package containing divorce papers, custody documents awarding Trevor full parental rights, and a one-way bus ticket to a small town in Montana where Vincent's people had arranged for her to work as a night shift janitor at a meat processing plant. The job was legitimate, but was also completely isolated from any social connections or professional opportunities. Paul's package contained bankruptcy documents, criminal complaint forms that would be filed if he remained in the state, and a one-way ticket to Alaska where he could work in oil field construction. Dangerous, isolated work that matched his new status as a social outcast. Eleanor's package was the most devastating. Documentation proving her son-in-law now controlled her former home, her bank accounts, and her social connections. Her one-way ticket was to Florida, to a retirement community that catered to indigent elderly residents with no family support. Each package included the same handwritten note: "You have 48 hours to disappear. If I ever see any of you again, if you ever contact Aiden or Brooke, if you ever return to this state, the videos of your confessions will be released in their entirety to every news outlet in the country. You will spend the rest of your lives as public symbols of betrayal and fraud." Trevor watched through surveillance cameras as each of them received their packages, their faces reflecting the complete hopelessness of people who'd lost everything and had no path back to their former lives. But Trevor had one final surprise. On the day they were scheduled to leave town, Trevor arranged to be at the bus station, not to threaten or gloat, but to deliver his final message personally. "You thought you could steal my life and disappear into your happy ending," he told them, his voice carrying across the nearly empty terminal. "Instead, you taught me something important. There are 2 kinds of people in this world, predators and prey. You spent 20 years thinking I was prey. Now you know better." He handed each of them a final envelope. Inside were bank account numbers for offshore accounts containing $50,000 each, enough money to start over, but not enough to live comfortably. The accounts came with conditions. The money could only be accessed if they remained in their assigned locations and never contacted anyone from their former lives. "I'm not a monster," Trevor said. "I'm giving you a chance to rebuild. But understand this. I will be watching. I will always be watching. And if you ever try to come back, if you ever try to contact my children, if you ever try to interfere with my life again, those confessions will be the least of your problems." As their buses pulled away, carrying his enemies toward lives of exile and isolation, Trevor felt a deep satisfaction settling into his bones. Justice had been served with surgical precision, leaving no loose ends and no possibility of future threats. The war was over, and Trevor Daniels had won completely. Chapter 9. The New Beginning. 6 months later, Trevor stood in his backyard watching Aiden mow the lawn while Brooke practiced basketball shots against the garage door. The scene looked like ordinary suburban family life, but everything had changed in ways both profound and invisible. The official story was simple. Candace had suffered a nervous breakdown and voluntarily relinquished custody while seeking treatment out of state. Paul had relocated for work opportunities. Eleanor had moved to Florida for retirement. Clean, legal, and completely believable to anyone who didn't know the real story. Aiden and Brooke had initially been devastated by their mother's breakdown and sudden departure, but Trevor had been patient and supportive during their transition. He'd arranged for counseling, maintained their school and social activities, and gradually helped them understand that sometimes people made choices that hurt the people they loved most. The DNA revelation remained Trevor's secret. He decided the children didn't need to know their biological parentage. They'd already lost enough stability, and learning about the deception that had defined their entire lives would serve no constructive purpose. In every way that mattered, Trevor was their father, and they were his children. What the children didn't know was that their mother, Paul, and grandmother were alive and well in their new lives of exile. Candace was actually working as a veterinary assistant in Montana. Trevor had arranged for better employment than the meat processing plant, recognizing that complete destitution would serve no purpose. Paul was managing a small construction crew in Alaska, earning decent money, but living in complete social isolation. Eleanor had found placement in a respectable retirement community in Florida. Her basic needs met, but her former social status permanently destroyed. Trevor received monthly reports on their activities through surveillance networks he maintained. None of them had violated the terms of their exile. None had attempted to contact the children, and none had tried to return to their former lives. They understood the consequences of crossing Trevor Daniels, and they were intelligent enough not to test his patience again. The financial and legal aftermath had been managed with surgical precision. Trevor's lawyers had documented every stolen asset, every fraudulent transaction, every moment of deception his enemies had confessed to. The recovery of his money, combined with damages for emotional distress and fraud, had actually left him wealthier than before the crisis began. More importantly, Trevor had discovered a new business opportunity in his methods. Vincent's security consulting firm had offered him a partnership providing specialized problem resolution services for clients facing similar betrayals. Wealthy individuals who needed complete and permanent solutions to personal or business conflicts that couldn't be handled through conventional legal channels. Trevor had declined the partnership but maintained the relationship. Sometimes problems required solutions that existed outside normal social and legal boundaries, and it was useful to know people who specialized in such work. His auto repair business had expanded significantly, both through his own renewed focus and through contracts he'd acquired when competitors had mysteriously encountered financial difficulties. Trevor now owned 5 shops across the region, each one profitable and each one a testament to what could be accomplished through superior planning and absolute ruthlessness toward one's enemies. But the most significant change was in Trevor himself. The discovery of his wife's betrayal had awakened something that had been dormant since his violent childhood. A complete understanding of his own capacity for strategic thinking and controlled violence. He'd always known he was different from other men, but he'd never fully explored the implications of that difference. Now he understood that he was fundamentally a predator who'd spent 20 years pretending to be a normal suburban family man. The pretense had been comfortable, but ultimately unsustainable. His true nature had reasserted itself when threatened, and he discovered capabilities he'd never imagined he possessed. Trevor's reputation in certain circles had grown considerably. Word had spread among business and social networks about what had happened to people who'd betrayed Trevor Daniels. The details remained secret, but the results were visible to anyone paying attention. 3 people had tried to destroy Trevor's life and had simply disappeared from existence. Other business owners sought Trevor's advice on handling partnership disputes and employee theft. Wealthy individuals facing divorce proceedings asked subtle questions about asset protection and leverage strategies. Trevor provided guidance when asked, but he was careful to maintain plausible deniability about the more extreme methods he'd employed. The message was clear throughout their extended community. Trevor Daniels was not a man to be crossed, betrayed, or underestimated. He was polite, professional, and generous to those who earned his respect. But to those who chose to become his enemies, he was something altogether more dangerous. On this particular evening, as Trevor watched his children playing in the yard of their acclaimed home, he felt a deep satisfaction that had nothing to do with revenge and everything to do with justice. He protected his family, recovered his stolen assets, and eliminated threats to his future happiness. Most importantly, he'd established a reputation that would prevent similar betrayals from ever occurring again. Aiden finished mowing and walked over to where Trevor stood on the deck. "Dad," the 16-year-old said, using the title he'd always used but which now carried deeper meaning. "Some guys at school were asking about Mom. What should I tell them?" Trevor put his hand on Aiden's shoulder, feeling the weight of responsibility and love that had defined their relationship since the boy's birth. Whatever genetic connection they lacked was irrelevant compared to the bonds they'd built through 16 years of shared experience. "Tell them your mother is getting the help she needs," Trevor said, "and that you're exactly where you belong." As the sun set over their suburban neighborhood, Trevor Daniels stood with his children and felt something he hadn't experienced in months: perfect peace. His enemies were gone, his family was safe, and his future was secure. He learned something important about himself during the war he'd fought and won. Trevor Daniels was a man who took care of his own, who built rather than destroyed when possible, but who was absolutely ruthless when protecting what he loved. Some people were meant to be predators. Trevor had finally stopped apologizing for what he was and started using his nature to protect the people who mattered most. In the end, that was all that mattered. His family was whole, his enemies were gone, and Trevor Daniels would never again be anyone's fool. The war was over. Trevor had won, and he would spend the rest of his life ensuring that victory remained permanent. And there you have it. Another story comes to an end. What did you think? I'd love to hear your thoughts in the comments below. If you enjoy this story, consider joining our community by subscribing. It means the world to us. For more stories like this one, check out the recommended videos on screen. And I'll see you there. Welcome back to another story on Infidelity Tales Lab. Before we begin, tell us, where in the world are you watching from? Now, let's dive into today's story. Chapter 1, The Surface. Lewis Knight stood on the deck of the SS Meridian, watching the Atlantic stretch endlessly in every direction. 200 miles from the nearest shore, surrounded by nothing but gray water and grayer sky. He'd been a maritime engineer for 12 years, spending 6 months at a time on cargo vessels, and the isolation had never bothered him. It gave him time to think, to plan, to save money for his daughter's future. His phone rarely worked out here, but today it buzzed with enough signal to receive a call. "Mr. Knight? This is Teresa Greer from Child Protective Services in Boston." Lewis's stomach dropped. CPS didn't call unless something was catastrophically wrong. "We found your daughter, Kara. She's 9 years old, correct?" "Yes." "What happened? Is she hurt?" His knuckles whitened around the railing. "She was discovered in an abandoned warehouse on Dorchester Avenue approximately 2 hours ago. Unconscious. Severe dehydration, hypothermia." "Mr. Knight, when did you last speak to your wife?" The world tilted. 3 days ago. Brief satellite call. She said everything was fine. Kara was at school. Your daughter never came home from school yesterday. The school called your home repeatedly. No answer. A teacher drove by your house. No one there. It's been 30 hours, Mr. Knight. In the background, Lewis heard the organized chaos of an emergency room. Paramedics shouting vitals. The whine of medical equipment. The sound of his daughter's life hanging by a thread. Where's Cassandra? Where's my wife? We haven't been able to locate her. We've tried all the numbers you listed as emergency contacts. Lewis's mind raced through the architecture of his life. He'd met Cassandra Wall 7 years ago at a maritime industry conference in Miami. She'd been a pharmaceutical sales rep, beautiful, charming, quick-witted. They'd married within a year. Kara came 10 months later. Everything had seemed perfect, or at least functional. Cassandra complained about his long absences, but he made good money. She'd quit her job to stay home with Kara. Or so he'd thought. I'm calling her now, Lewis said. Which hospital? Massachusetts General. Mr. Knight, I need to ask, has your wife shown any signs of neglect before? Never. He stopped. Actually, when he thought about it, Kara had been quieter during their video calls lately. Less excited to talk. And Cassandra had started dodging questions about Kara's schoolwork, her friends, her life. I'll be there as soon as I can. Tell Kara her daddy's coming. He hung up and immediately dialed Cassandra. She answered on the 4th ring. Music blared in the background. Club music, the deep bass of a Thursday afternoon party. Laughter. Male voices. Lewis. Baby. What's up? Where the fuck is Kara? Silence. The music didn't stop, but Cassandra's breathing changed. Kara? She's at school, isn't she? It's 4 in the afternoon, Cassandra. School ended 3 hours ago. More silence. Then, impossibly, oh shit. I forgot. Lewis had been in storms that nearly capsized cargo ships. He'd seen men swept overboard, watched shipping containers the size of houses break loose and crush equipment. He'd kept his cool through all of it. But those 3 words, oh shit, I forgot, shattered something fundamental in his chest. You forgot, he repeated, his voice deadly calm. You forgot our daughter. Lewis, listen, I can explain. She's in a coma, Cassandra. They found her in an abandoned building. Unconscious. Alone for 30 hours. The line went quiet except for the music. When Cassandra spoke again, her voice was different. Calculating. Is she going to be okay? No, I'm so sorry. Not I'm coming to the hospital. Just a clinical question about outcomes. I don't know, Lewis said. But I'm coming home. And when I get there, you better have a damn good explanation. It was an accident. 30 hours isn't an accident. It's abandonment. He ended the call and immediately dialed his captain. I need emergency leave. Family crisis. My daughter's in the hospital. Captain Gene Conley had sailed with Lewis for 6 years. Done. We'll dock in Halifax in 18 hours. I'll arrange a helicopter to meet us halfway. Thank you, Lewis. Whatever you're walking into, keep your head clear. You're smart. Don't let emotion make you stupid. But as Lewis went below to pack his duffel bag, he wasn't thinking about staying smart. He was thinking about the way Cassandra had laughed before answering the phone. The way she'd said, I forgot, like she'd missed a grocery run, not left their daughter to die. He opened his laptop and started making calls. First to his lawyer, Stuart Moss, who'd handled his will and maritime contracts. Then to an old Navy buddy, Nelson Ramsey, who now worked in private security in Boston. Lewis Knight had spent 12 years learning how to solve complex mechanical problems under pressure, how to think 3 steps ahead when lives depended on it, how to be patient, methodical, and absolutely thorough. He was about to apply every single one of those skills to destroying his wife. Chapter 2. The Descent. The helicopter touched down at Logan Airport 17 hours later. Lewis hadn't slept. He'd spent the flight researching, documenting, calling in favors. His phone now contained a detailed timeline of Cassandra's social media activity over the past 6 months. Deleted posts he'd recovered through cached pages and screenshots from friends. She'd been living a completely different life. Nelson Ramsey waited at the helipad, a bull of a man with graying temples and the bearing of someone who'd seen combat. Knight, car's ready. Fill me in. Lewis climbed into the black SUV. I need surveillance on my house. Complete financial audit of my wife's accounts. And I need to know everywhere she's been in the last 72 hours. Already started. Your lawyer's meeting us at the hospital. Nelson pulled into traffic, his eyes on Lewis in the rearview mirror. You look like hell, brother. My daughter's in a coma because her mother forgot she existed. It wasn't forgetting. Nelson handed him a tablet. Your boy Stuart got a preliminary warrant. Pulled your wife's credit card statements. Look at Monday and Tuesday. Lewis scrolled through the charges. Monday, $437 at a boutique hotel in Cambridge. Room service, champagne, spa treatments. Tuesday, $856 at a casino in Connecticut. Multiple bar tabs. A jewelry purchase at 2:47 a.m. While Kara was lying in an abandoned warehouse, dying of exposure, Cassandra had been gambling and buying earrings. There's more, Nelson said quietly. She wasn't alone. Guy named Tony O'Neill. Works in real estate, divorced, known for living above his means. They checked into that hotel as Mr. and Mrs. O'Neill. Lewis's hands didn't shake. He'd learned a long time ago that rage wasn't useful unless you could channel it into precision. How long? Text messages go back 11 months. Right around when you left for your last rotation. Nearly a year, Lewis had been sending money home, calling Kara every night he had satellite access, planning a future, and Cassandra had been building a parallel life with another man. The daughter, Lewis said. She knew, didn't she? 9-year-olds aren't stupid. Yeah, I bet money Kara knew something was wrong. Massachusetts General Hospital loomed ahead. Lewis was out of the car before it fully stopped, Nelson trailing behind with a folder of documents. Teresa Greer met them in the pediatric ICU waiting room, a tired woman in her 50s with kind eyes and a steel spine. Mr. Knight, your daughter is stable but unconscious. The doctors are cautiously optimistic, but there may be neurological damage from the exposure. Can I see her? Of course. But first, I need to inform you that we've opened a formal investigation. The circumstances of Kara's abandonment suggest severe neglect at minimum, possibly criminal endangerment. Where is Mrs. Knight? I don't know and I don't care. What matters is Kara. Actually, it matters legally. We need to interview your wife. She hasn't responded to any of our calls. Stuart Moss arrived then, a sharp-dressed lawyer in his 40s with the reputation of a barracuda. Lewis, I filed for emergency custody and a restraining order. Given the circumstances, we'll get it. But we need to move fast. Do it. Teresa led Lewis through secured doors to a small room where machines beeped in rhythmic patterns. Kara looked impossibly small on the hospital bed, her dark hair matted, her face pale. IVs ran into both arms. A breathing tube had been removed, but the indentations remained on her cheeks. Lewis sat beside her and took her small hand. It was warm. That was something. Hey, baby girl. Daddy's here. I'm so sorry I wasn't here sooner. His voice cracked. But I'm here now, and I'm not leaving. And I promise you, he leaned close, whispering so only she could hear. I promise you, she'll pay for this. Every second you were alone. Every moment you were scared. She'll pay for all of it. A nurse, Diana Hensley, entered to check vitals. She squeezed someone's hand earlier. The doctor thinks she can hear us. Kara, if you can hear me, squeeze my hand. Nothing. Then, the faintest pressure. Lewis's eyes burned. That's my girl. You fight. You're a knight. We're fighters. Diana smiled softly. I'll give you some privacy. The police want to speak with you when you're ready. 30 minutes later, Lewis sat across from Detective Hugo McNeil, a veteran cop with a weary face and sharp instincts. Mr. Knight, walk me through your timeline. When did you last see your daughter? 6 months ago, August 15th. I left for a rotation in the North Atlantic. I called home 3 to 4 times a week via satellite phone. Last spoke to Kara 3 days ago. And your wife? Same timeline. She seemed normal. Said Kara was doing well in school. Nothing seemed wrong. Did you notice any behavioral changes? In either of them. Lewis thought back. Kara was quieter lately. Less talkative. I thought maybe she was just getting older, more independent. I didn't think, he stopped. I should have known. You were 200 miles offshore. You trusted your wife. Hugo leaned forward. Between you and me, I got a daughter too. If someone did this to her, I'd burn the world down. But you seem calm. I am calm. That worries me. Lewis met his eyes steadily. I'm not going to do anything illegal, detective. I'm going to use the law. I'm going to use evidence. I'm going to methodically dismantle my wife's life until she loses everything. And it's all going to be completely above board. Hugo studied him. You're a smart guy, Mr. Knight. Keep it that way. After the detective left, Stewart pulled Lewis aside. We got the emergency custody order. Cassandra is officially barred from seeing Kara without supervision. But Lewis, there's something else. I pulled her phone records. She's been in contact with a lawyer too. Ronald Vaughn. He specializes in parental rights cases. She's going to fight for custody? Looks like it. And Vaughn's good. He'll spin this as a mental health episode, temporary insanity, postpartum depression, anything to make her sympathetic. Lewis looked through the window at his daughter, small and broken in that hospital bed. Let her try, he said quietly. I want her to fight, because when she loses, and she will lose, I want her to know she gave it everything and still failed. I want her to feel exactly how powerless Kara felt in that warehouse. Stewart nodded slowly. All right, then we prepare for war. Chapter 3, The Truth Beneath. 3 days passed. Kara woke up on the 4th morning, confused and frightened. The doctors said she'd been lucky. No permanent brain damage, though she'd need physical therapy for the muscle weakness from dehydration. But the psychological damage was harder to measure. Lewis hadn't left the hospital except to shower at Nelson's apartment. He was there when Kara opened her eyes, when she cried and asked why Mommy didn't come get her, when she finally fell back asleep clutching his hand. He was also there when Detective McNeil returned with new information. We found where your wife has been staying. A condo in Brookline. Belongs to Tony O'Neill. Let me guess, she's still there. Was. She checked into a different hotel yesterday. Paid cash. But here's the interesting part. Hugo slid a folder across the table. O'Neill's got a record. Nothing major. Fraud. Writing bad checks. Small-time grifts. The guy's a professional loser who's good at looking successful. Lewis flipped through police reports, financial documents. O'Neill had been married twice before, both divorces acrimonious, both wives claiming he manipulated them financially. You think he targeted Cassandra? Maybe. Or maybe they're two selfish people who found each other. Either way, there's a pattern here. O'Neill gets close to women with resources or access to resources. Your maritime contracts are worth what? $700,000 a year. About that. And your house in Newton is worth $1.2 million. I bought it before the market surge. Hugo nodded. So Cassandra has access to significant assets. O'Neill has a pattern of financial manipulation. You see where I'm going? Lewis saw it clearly. He wanted my money. Cassandra wanted my money. And Kara was in the way. We can't prove intent yet. But abandonment leading to child endangerment? That's a Class A felony in Massachusetts. 2 to 10 years. Stewart appeared in the doorway. Lewis, we've got a problem. Cassandra's lawyer filed an emergency motion claiming you're psychologically unfit due to prolonged isolation at sea. They're demanding a psychiatric evaluation before the custody hearing. On what grounds? They're claiming your work environment, 6 months of isolation, high stress, dangerous conditions, makes you potentially unstable. They've got an expert witness, some psychiatrist named Dr. Phyllis Conrad, who will testify that maritime workers show elevated rates of depression and dissociation. Nelson, who'd been listening silently, laughed once, sharp and bitter. That's bullshit. Lewis is the most stable person I know. Doesn't matter what's true, Stewart said. Matters what we can prove. Lewis, you'll need to submit to evaluation. Fine. Set it up. There's more. Cassandra's doing media interviews, playing the grieving mother. She gave a statement to Channel 7 claiming she had a mental breakdown, that she's seeking treatment, that she loves Kara and made a terrible mistake. Lewis stood and walked to the window. Below, news vans circled the hospital like sharks. She's building her narrative. Smart move on her part, Stewart admitted. Public sympathy could influence the judge. Then we counter it. Lewis turned to face them. Nelson, I need complete surveillance on O'Neill and Cassandra. Every conversation, every meeting. Legal methods only. I don't want anything thrown out of court. Already on it. Got two guys rotating shifts. Hugo, what do you need from me to strengthen the criminal case? The detective considered Kara's statement. When she's ready. And we need to establish timeline and intent. The stronger we can make the case that this was deliberate neglect, not a mental health crisis, the better. Lewis nodded. Stewart, file a motion to compel Cassandra's financial records for the past year. Every transaction, every account. I want to see exactly where our money went. Over the next week, a picture emerged that made Lewis's blood run cold. Cassandra had opened 3 credit cards in her name only, maxing them out on luxury items and cash advances. Total debt of $68,000. She'd been withdrawing cash from their joint account in amounts just below $10,000 to avoid automatic reporting. 35 withdrawals over 7 months. She'd taken a second mortgage on their house without his knowledge, forging his signature, pulling out another $120,000. All of it had gone to funding her life with Tony O'Neill. But the worst discovery came from Nelson's surveillance team. You need to see this, Nelson said, pulling up a video on his laptop. The footage showed Cassandra and Tony at an outdoor cafe in Cambridge 3 weeks earlier. Audio was clear. Tony, she's going to be a problem. Kids always are. Cassandra, I know, but what am I supposed to do? Lewis sends money directly to the school, the pediatrician. I can't touch those accounts. Tony, there are solutions. Boarding schools. My ex sent her kids to one in Vermont. Year-round program. Cassandra, Kara would tell Lewis. She's a daddy's girl. Tony, then we wait until he's out to sea again. Tell him it was her idea. By the time he gets back, it's done. Lewis watched his wife discuss sending their daughter away, like she was a piece of furniture. There was no love there, no maternal instinct, just cold calculation. There's more, Nelson said quietly. From yesterday, new footage. Cassandra and Tony in a hotel room. Cassandra crying, but her tears looked performative. Cassandra, the lawyer says if I play this right, I can still get custody. Or at least joint custody, which means Lewis has to keep paying. Tony, what about the criminal charges? Cassandra, Vaughn thinks he can get it down to a misdemeanor. Community service, probation, maybe some mandated therapy. The key is making sure I look like a victim. Tony kissed her neck. You're brilliant. Cassandra laughed. I know. Lewis closed the laptop. His hands were steady, his voice calm. Can we use this in court? Some of it. The cafe conversation, definitely. The hotel room footage is trickier. Expectation of privacy. But Stewart can probably get it admitted under the abandonment investigation. Do it. The custody hearing was scheduled for 3 weeks out. In the meantime, Lewis began phase 2 of his plan. He hired a forensic accountant, Alexander Garrison, who testified in dozens of fraud cases. Alexander spent 72 hours analyzing every financial transaction in Lewis and Cassandra's accounts. His report was damning. Clear evidence of financial fraud, forgery, and embezzlement of marital assets. More than enough for criminal charges. Lewis also spoke to Kara's teachers, her pediatrician, her neighbors. The story that emerged broke his heart. Kara had been showing signs of neglect for months. Coming to school in dirty clothes, missing assignments, appearing hungry. Her teacher, Kay Gonzalez, had called the house multiple times, always getting voicemail. Almost called CPS 2 months ago. Kay admitted, guilt written across her face. But Kara begged me not to. She said her mom was just tired, that everything was fine. I should have called anyway. This isn't your fault, Lewis told her. It's Cassandra's. Only Cassandra's. The day before the custody hearing, Lewis sat with Kara in her hospital room. She was being discharged tomorrow, going to stay with Lewis at Nelson's apartment until the custody situation was resolved. Daddy? Why did Mommy leave me there? Lewis had prepared for this question. He consulted with Kara's therapist, Dr. Elena Booker, about how to answer honestly without causing more damage. Your mom made some very bad choices, sweetheart. She was spending time with someone else, and she forgot what was really important. You. That's not your fault. None of this is your fault. Is she going to jail? Maybe. Would that make you sad? Kara thought about it, her 9-year-old brain processing complex emotions. I don't think so. She was mean before you left. She yelled a lot. She said I was in the way. Lewis's jaw tightened, but he kept his voice gentle. You're not in the way. You're the most important thing in my entire life. And I'm going to make sure you're safe. Always. Promise. I promise. That night, Lewis reviewed his strategy with Stewart and Nelson. Everything was in place. The evidence was overwhelming. Cassandra's public sympathy campaign had backfired when her spending records leaked to the press. Suddenly, she wasn't a struggling mother, but a materialistic socialite who'd abandoned her daughter for a boyfriend. We're going to win this, Stewart said confidently. She doesn't have a leg to stand on. But Lewis knew the real battle hadn't even started yet. Because tomorrow, Cassandra would be in that courtroom, and he'd have to face her for the first time since the phone call. And when he did, he needed to stay calm, stay smart, stay 3 steps ahead. Because winning custody was only the first part of his plan. The second part was making sure Cassandra lost everything else. Chapter 4. The Testimony. The Suffolk County Family Court was a study in institutional beige, neutral walls, neutral carpet, designed to strip emotion from what were often the most emotional proceedings imaginable. Lewis sat at the plaintiff's table, Stewart beside him, wearing a press suit that made him look exactly like what he was, a competent professional, a good father, someone the system should trust. Across the aisle, Cassandra had transformed herself into a completely different person. Gone was the glamorous woman from the social media photos. Today she wore a modest gray dress, minimal makeup, her hair pulled into a conservative bun. She dabbed at her eyes with a tissue, playing the role of devastated mother to perfection. Next to her, Ronald Vaughn looked like he'd been cast from Central Lawyer Headquarters. Silver hair, expensive suit, practiced expression of grave concern. Judge Armando Rowe entered, and the bailiff called court to order. This is an emergency custody hearing in the matter of Knight versus Knight. Judge Rowe began. Mr. Moss, you filed for sole custody with supervised visitation. Mrs. Knight, you're opposing. Let's begin with opening statements. Stewart stood. Your Honor, this is a straightforward case of child endangerment and abandonment. Mrs. Knight left her 9-year-old daughter at school and didn't return for 30 hours. The child was found unconscious in an abandoned building, suffering from severe dehydration and hypothermia. During that time, Mrs. Knight was at a casino with her boyfriend, spending marital funds while her daughter fought for her life. We have evidence of systematic neglect, financial fraud, and deliberate endangerment. Mr. Knight is requesting full custody to protect his daughter from further harm. Vaughn stood next, his voice dripping with practiced empathy. Your Honor, this is a tragedy born of mental illness, not malice. Mrs. Knight has suffered from severe postpartum depression for years, exacerbated by her husband's prolonged absences. 6 months at sea, Your Honor. 6 months where a young mother is left alone with no support, no help, slowly drowning in depression and anxiety. On the day in question, Mrs. Knight experienced a dissociative episode, a complete break from reality. She's since been diagnosed by Dr. Phyllis Conrad, a leading psychiatrist, and has begun intensive treatment. She loves her daughter and made a terrible mistake while in the grip of mental illness. Punishing her with complete loss of custody would be cruel and counterproductive. Lewis kept his face neutral, but his hands curled into fists below the table. Judge Rowe nodded. Mr. Moss, call your first witness. The Commonwealth calls Detective Hugo McNeil. Hugo took the stand, was sworn in, and Stewart led him through the discovery of Kara, the abandoned warehouse, the condition she was found in, the timeline of Cassandra's whereabouts. Detective, what did you discover about Mrs. Knight's activities during the 30 hours her daughter was missing? Hugo consulted his notes. Credit card records show she was at the Mohegan Sun Casino in Connecticut. Multiple charges, slot machines, restaurants, hotel bar. She didn't return to Massachusetts until approximately 11 p.m. on Tuesday, 3 hours after her daughter was discovered. Did she attempt to contact her daughter during this time? No phone records of any outgoing calls to the school, to friends, or to emergency services. She made several calls to Tony O'Neill. And when you finally reached Mrs. Knight, what was her response? She claimed she'd lost track of time. She said she thought her husband was handling pickup from school. Was Mr. Knight in the country? No. He was 200 miles offshore in the North Atlantic. Stewart nodded. No further questions. Vaughn stood for cross-examination. Detective McNeil, in your experience, can mental illness cause people to lose track of time? Objection, Stewart said. The detective isn't a medical expert. Sustained. Vaughn pivoted smoothly. Detective, did you find any evidence that Mrs. Knight intentionally harmed her daughter? Hugo's jaw tightened. The abandonment itself caused harm. But did you find evidence of intent to cause that specific harm? A plan, written communications indicating she wanted her daughter hurt. Not explicitly, but thank you, detective. The next witness was Kay Gonzalez, Kara's teacher. She testified about the signs of neglect, the dirty clothes, the missed parent-teacher conferences, the decline in Kara's grades and social engagement. When Kara didn't get picked up from school, what did you do? Stewart asked. I called the emergency contacts. Mrs. Knight's phone went to voicemail. I couldn't reach Mr. Knight because he was at sea. I waited an hour, then called our principal. We tried to find Kara, but she'd left the school grounds. A 9-year-old walked away from school alone, and no one noticed for an hour? We have 300 students. It was chaos during dismissal. By the time we realized, Kay's voice broke. I should have called the police immediately. This isn't your fault, Ms. Gonzalez. You did everything right. Mrs. Knight was the parent. She was responsible. During cross-examination, Vaughn asked, Ms. Gonzalez, did Kara ever mention her mother being depressed or acting strangely? Kay hesitated. She said her mom was tired a lot. Tired? A symptom of depression, isn't it? I suppose. Did Kara seem scared of her mother? Not scared exactly, but she was quiet about her home life. Vaughn nodded as if this proved his point. A mother struggling with mental illness, too ashamed to ask for help. Tragic. Then came the forensic accountant, Alexander Garrison. He laid out the financial evidence with clinical precision. The forged documents, the hidden accounts, the systematic draining of marital assets. Mr. Garrison, Stewart asked, in your expert opinion, does this financial pattern suggest mental illness or deliberate fraud? Deliberate fraud. The timing, the amounts chosen to avoid reporting thresholds, the creation of separate accounts. These are conscious decisions made by someone avoiding detection. Could someone in a dissociative state do this? Not in my experience. This requires planning, sustained attention, and awareness of legal consequences. Vaughn's cross was aggressive. Mr. Garrison, are you a psychiatrist? No. Then you can't actually diagnose mental illness, can you? I can recognize patterns of criminal behavior. That's not what I asked. The battle went back and forth for hours. Then Stewart called Lewis to the stand. Mr. Knight, tell us about your relationship with your daughter. Lewis relaxed slightly. This he could do. Kara is everything to me. I know my job takes me away for months at a time, but I call her every night I have satellite access. We video chat when possible. I text her pictures of where I am, what I'm seeing. When I'm home, we're inseparable. And your relationship with your wife? I thought we had a partnership. I worked to provide financial stability. She managed the home and cared for Kara. I trusted her completely. When did you first suspect something was wrong? Lewis described the phone call, the moment Cassandra said I forgot, the sound of music and laughter in the background. His voice never wavered. He presented facts, timelines, evidence of his own attempts to stay connected despite the distance. Mr. Knight, if you're granted custody, what's your plan for Kara's care? I resigned from maritime work. I've accepted a position with a local engineering firm. 9 to 5, no travel. I'll be there for Kara every day. She'll have stability, therapy, everything she needs to recover. You're giving up a $700,000 salary. Without hesitation. Kara is worth more than any amount of money. Vaughn's cross-examination was designed to paint Lewis as controlling and absent. Mr. Knight, you spent 6 months at a time away from your family. Isn't that abandonment too? I was working to support them, and I maintained constant contact. Constant? Phone calls every few days. Every day when possible. Satellite communication is limited, but you weren't physically present. You weren't there for parent-teacher conferences, for illnesses, for the daily struggles of raising a child. Lewis met his eyes steadily. No, I wasn't. I trusted my wife to handle those things. That trust was misplaced. Or perhaps your absence contributed to her mental decline? My absence didn't make her steal money and spend it on her boyfriend. My absence didn't make her leave our daughter to die. Objection. Vaughn snapped. Inflammatory. Sustained. Mr. Knight, please answer only the questions asked. But the damage was done. The jury of the court, Judge Rowe, had seen Lewis's controlled anger, his clear mind, his absolute commitment to his daughter. Then Cassandra took the stand, and the performance began. She cried beautifully, explaining how the loneliness had crushed her, how she'd spiraled into depression, how Tony O'Neill had been a friend who became something more during her darkest times. I never meant to hurt Kara, she sobbed. I love her so much. That day I broke. I couldn't think straight. I know it sounds impossible, but I genuinely forgot. My mind just erased it. Vaughn led her gently through her diagnosis, her new medication regimen, her commitment to therapy. Then Stewart stood for cross-examination, and Lewis leaned forward. Mrs. Knight, you testified that you experienced a dissociative episode. Is that correct? Yes. During this episode, you forgot your daughter existed? I didn't forget she existed. The time slipped away. Stewart pulled out a document. I have a credit card statement from that day. You made purchases at 2:15 p.m., 4:47 p.m., 6:33 p.m., and 9:12 p.m. You signed receipts. You interacted with dealers at the casino, with waitstaff, with hotel employees. You appeared normal to all of them. I was on autopilot. You were functional enough to gamble, to drink, to socialize, but not functional enough to remember your daughter. It's hard to explain. Let me make it easier. You didn't forget Kara. You chose to ignore her. You chose Tony O'Neill over your daughter. No. Stewart played the surveillance video from the cafe, the one where Cassandra and Tony discussed sending Kara to boarding school. The courtroom went silent as Cassandra's own voice echoed. She's going to be a problem. Kids always are. Judge Rowe's expression hardened. That was taken out of context, Cassandra said desperately. We were just talking hypothetically. You called your daughter a problem 3 weeks before you abandoned her. Cassandra's lawyer objected repeatedly, but the evidence was there. The video, the financial records, the timeline of deliberate neglect. When court adjourned for the day, Lewis knew they'd won. But he also knew Cassandra would have one more card to play, and he was ready for it. Chapter 5, The Depths. That evening, Lewis returned to Nelson's apartment where Kara was staying under the supervision of a court-appointed guardian. She ran to him, and he scooped her up, holding her tight. How's my brave girl? Tired, but okay. Did you win? Not yet, but we will. After Kara went to bed, Lewis, Stewart, and Nelson gathered around the kitchen table. Judge Rowe's leaning our way, Stewart said. The surveillance video destroyed Cassandra's credibility. But Vaughn's going to push the mental illness angle hard tomorrow. He'll bring in Dr. Conrad, and she'll testify that everything Cassandra did is consistent with severe depression and dissociation. Can we counter it? We have our own psychiatric expert, Dr. Elena Booker, who's been working with Kara. She'll testify that Cassandra's behavior shows personality disorder traits, narcissism, and antisocial patterns, not depression. Nelson pulled out his laptop. There's something else you need to see. My team's been digging into Tony O'Neill's background. He's done this before. The screen showed police reports from 2 previous relationships. In both cases, O'Neill had courted married women, encouraged them to leave their husbands, helped them hide assets, then disappeared once the money was gone. He's a professional predator, Nelson said, and he's grooming Cassandra to take the fall while he walks away clean. Lewis studied the reports. She doesn't know, does she? Doubt it. She thinks they're in love. Can we use this? Stewart considered. It establishes pattern of behavior. Shows this wasn't a one-time mental breakdown, but a calculated relationship. Yeah, I can use it. The next morning, Dr. Phyllis Conrad took the stand for the defense. She was impressive. Credentials from Johns Hopkins, 20 years of experience, published research on postpartum depression. Dr. Conrad, Vaughn asked, In your professional opinion, is Mrs. Knight's behavior consistent with severe postpartum depression and dissociative episodes? Absolutely. The isolation, the feelings of being overwhelmed, the gradual detachment from reality. These are textbook symptoms. When combined with the stress of single parenting for months at a time, a complete dissociative break is not only possible but predictable. Could this condition cause her to forget her child? In severe cases, yes. The mind essentially shuts down non-critical functions to protect itself. It's a survival mechanism. Stewart's cross-examination was surgical. Dr. Conrad, you've examined Mrs. Knight twice for a total of 4 hours. Is that correct? Yes. And these examinations occurred after the abandonment, after Mrs. Knight was facing criminal charges? That's when she sought treatment, or when her lawyer told her she needed a diagnosis to avoid prison? Objection. Sustained. Stewart shifted gears. Dr. Conrad, is it possible for someone to fake the symptoms of dissociation? Possible, but is it possible for someone to claim mental illness as a defense strategy? I suppose, but your training didn't include access to Mrs. Knight's financial records, her surveillance footage, her text messages with Tony O'Neill. You base your diagnosis purely on her self-reported symptoms, didn't you? Dr. Conrad's confidence wavered. That's standard practice. Even when the patient has a clear motive to lie. The objections came fast, but Stewart had made his point. Then he called Dr. Elena Booker. Elena was younger than Dr. Conrad, but no less credible. She'd been working with Kara for 2 weeks, and her testimony was devastating. I've reviewed Kara's case extensively. The pattern of neglect goes back months, well before any alleged dissociative episode. Kara describes her mother as increasingly angry, resentful, and absent. She reports being told she was in the way and a burden. This isn't depression. This is a personality disorder characterized by lack of empathy and narcissistic traits. Can you explain the difference? Stewart asked. Depression makes people feel terrible about themselves. Personality disorders make people feel terrible about everyone else. Mrs. Knight wasn't sad about abandoning Kara. She was annoyed Kara existed in the first place. Vaughn tried to discredit Elena, but she held firm. Then Stewart dropped his bombshell. Your Honor, I'd like to call Anthony O'Neill to the stand. Cassandra's face went white. Tony, sitting in the back of the courtroom, looked like he wanted to bolt. The bailiff brought him forward, and Stewart began with simple questions. How he met Cassandra, the nature of their relationship. Mr. O'Neill, how long have you been seeing Mrs. Knight? About 11 months. And you knew she was married? Yes. Did you know she had a daughter? Yes. Did you encourage Mrs. Knight to spend time with you instead of caring for her daughter? Tony squirmed. I didn't encourage anything. We're adults. She made her own choices. Stewart pulled out the cafe surveillance video again, played it for the court. Tony's voice. She's going to be a problem. Kids always are. That sounds like encouragement to me, Mr. O'Neill. I was just venting. You were manipulating a married woman to abandon her child, so you'd have unrestricted access to her money. Stewart presented the financial records showing cash transfers from Cassandra to Tony. $63,000 over 8 months. What was that for? Loans. Investments. Investments in what? Various business opportunities. Name one. Tony couldn't, because there were no investments. Just a con artist bleeding his mark dry. Stewart turned to Cassandra. Mrs. Knight, did you know Mr. O'Neill has 2 previous relationships with married women that followed the exact same pattern? Cassandra's shock looked genuine. What? Stewart presented the police reports. Tony had done this before. The same playbook. Romance. Encouragement to hide assets. Eventual abandonment once the money dried up. Cassandra turned to look at Tony, betrayal written across her face. And Lewis, watching from the plaintiff's table, felt nothing. No satisfaction, no vindication, just a cold, clinical awareness that his plan was working. Judge Rowe called a recess. During the break, Lewis watched Cassandra and Tony argue in the hallway, their voices rising. Security had to intervene. When court resumed, Judge Rowe looked tired. I've heard enough. This case presents a clear situation of child endangerment and systematic neglect. While I'm sympathetic to mental health struggles, the evidence shows a pattern of deliberate behavior, not isolated incident. Mrs. Knight chose her relationship over her daughter repeatedly. The abandonment was the culmination of months of neglect, not a sudden break from reality. Cassandra started crying again, but this time it looked real. The performance was over. I'm granting sole physical and legal custody to Mr. Lewis Knight. Mrs. Knight will have supervised visitation only, pending the outcome of criminal proceedings. Additionally, I'm ordering a full forensic audit of all marital assets and recommending the district attorney pursue charges of child endangerment, fraud, and forgery. The gavel fell. Lewis had won, but as he walked out of the courtroom, Kara's hand in his, he knew this was just the beginning. The custody battle was over. The criminal trial would be harder, and he had one more piece to put in place, ensuring Tony O'Neill paid for his role in destroying his family. That night, Lewis received a call from an unknown number. Mr. Knight, this is Detective Calvin Glover, Fraud Division. I understand you have information about Tony O'Neill. Lewis smiled. Yes, Detective. I have quite a lot of information. What would you like to meet? Chapter 6, The Trap. Tony O'Neill was many things, a con artist, a manipulator, a coward, but he wasn't entirely stupid, which made him dangerous in a cornered animal kind of way. Lewis knew this. So when he met Detective Glover at a coffee shop in Cambridge, he came prepared with not just evidence, but a strategy. O'Neill's been running this scam for years, Lewis explained, spreading documents across the table. He targets married women with assets, befriends them, romances them, convinces them their husbands are the problem. Once he has access to their finances, he bleeds them dry through business investments that never materialize. Glover studied the pattern. We've had our eye on him before, but the victims never press charges. They're too embarrassed. Cassandra will press charges. You sure about that? For what I saw in court, she's still defending him. She was, until she saw the police reports from his previous marks. I made sure my lawyer presented them publicly. Now she knows she's just another victim in a long line. That's cold, Mr. Knight. So, is leaving a 9-year-old to die in a warehouse. Glover nodded slowly. What do you need from me? I need you to build a case against O'Neill that's ironclad. Wire fraud, financial exploitation, possibly conspiracy to commit child endangerment. I'll provide every record, every surveillance video, every piece of evidence. But I need you to move fast before he runs. He's a flight risk. His last 2 victims? He disappeared the moment things got complicated. He's already liquidating assets. Nelson had confirmed it. O'Neill had sold his car, emptied his apartment with drawn cash. He was getting ready to ghost. I can get a warrant, Glover said. Maybe freeze his accounts. Do it today. While Glover worked the legal angle, Lewis played a riskier card. He called Cassandra. She answered on the 3rd ring, her voice hoarse from crying. What do you want? To offer you a choice. I have nothing to say to you. Then listen. Tony O'Neill has done this to at least 2 other women. He found them, manipulated them, stole their money, and disappeared. You're not special to him, Cassandra. You're a mark. Silence. I don't believe you. Then call him. Ask him where the $63,000 went. Ask him about the business investments. Ask him why he's liquidating his assets. More silence. He loves me. He loves your access to my money. The second you're convicted and lose that access, he's gone. You'll be in prison, and he'll be in Florida or Nevada finding his next victim. Why do you care? You got what you wanted. You got Kara. Lewis kept his voice level. I care because I want him to pay for what he did to my daughter. And you're the only one who can make that happen. How? Testify against him. Full cooperation with the fraud investigation. In exchange, I'll recommend leniency at your sentencing hearing. You'd help me. I'd help Kara have a mother who's not in prison for 10 years. She's been through enough. It was partially true. Lewis did want Kara to have some relationship with her mother, eventually, after years of therapy and genuine remorse. But more than that, he wanted Tony O'Neill to face consequences. I need to think about it. You have 24 hours. After that, O'Neill will be gone, and you'll take the fall alone. Lewis hung up before she could respond. The next move came from an unexpected direction. Kay Gonzalez, Kara's teacher, contacted Lewis with information she'd been reluctant to share during the custody trial. "Mr. Knight, there's something I need to tell you." About 6 weeks before Kara was abandoned, another parent reported seeing Mrs. Knight with a man at a hotel in Newton. The parent didn't think much of it at the time, but in light of everything— "Do you have the parent's contact information?" "Yes. Her name is Heidi Glover. She's a lawyer, actually. She said if you need a statement, she's willing to provide one." Lewis met with Heidi at her office. She was sharp, professional, and clearly angry about what had happened to Kara. "I saw them at the Four Seasons. Cassandra and a man I didn't recognize checking in midday. I remember because I was there for a work lunch, and it struck me as odd. Why would a local parent need a hotel room in the middle of the day? Would you be willing to testify to that?" "Absolutely. I've been following the case. What she did to that little girl." Heidi shook her head. "I have kids. I can't imagine." Lewis added Heidi's statement to his growing file. Every piece of evidence, every witness, every documented instance of Cassandra's neglect and deception. But the real break came 30 hours after Lewis's call to Cassandra. She called back. "I'll do it. I'll testify against Tony." "What changed your mind?" "I went to his apartment. It's empty. He's gone. He didn't even say goodbye. Just vanished." Her voice broke. "You were right. About all of it." Lewis felt no satisfaction, only grim confirmation. "I'll connect you with Detective Glover. He'll need a full statement." "Lewis? I know I don't deserve to ask, but can I see Kara? Just for a few minutes? I need to tell her I'm sorry." "That's up to Kara." He asked his daughter that evening, explaining carefully that her mother wanted to apologize. Kara, wise beyond her 9 years, thought about it. "Will you stay with me?" "Every second." The meeting was supervised, held at Dr. Booker's office with the therapist present. Cassandra looked terrible. Unwashed hair, shadows under her eyes, the glossy veneer completely gone. "Kara, I'm so sorry. I was a terrible mother. I let you down in the worst possible way." Kara didn't run to her, didn't cry. She just looked at her mother with those serious dark eyes and said, "You forgot me." "I did, and I'll regret it for the rest of my life. Tony was more important than me. Tony was a mistake. You're my daughter. You should have been my whole world. Should have been, but wasn't." The simple truth of it hung in the air. Cassandra started crying again, but Kara remained dry-eyed. "I'm living with Daddy now. He resigned from his ship job to stay with me. That's what parents do." Lewis's throat tightened. He put his hand on Kara's shoulder. The visit lasted 15 minutes. When it was over, Kara turned to Lewis and said, "Can we go home now?" Home. Nelson's apartment had become home faster than their house in Newton ever had been. "Yeah, sweetheart, we can go home." A week later, Tony O'Neill was arrested in Providence, Rhode Island, trying to board a bus to Miami. He'd been using a fake ID, carrying $47,000 in cash, and had already opened bank accounts under an assumed name. The charges were extensive: wire fraud, financial exploitation of a vulnerable person, conspiracy to commit forgery, and, thanks to Cassandra's testimony, conspiracy to commit child endangerment. Lewis watched the news coverage of the arrest with grim satisfaction. But he wasn't done yet, because while the legal system would handle Tony and Cassandra, there was still one more person who needed to face consequences: Lewis himself. He'd been so focused on work, on providing financially, that he'd missed the signs of his family falling apart. He'd trusted blindly instead of verifying. He'd been absent when Kara needed him. That guilt would never fully disappear, but he could use it as motivation to be better. He started by selling the house in Newton. Too many bad memories. He bought a smaller place in Cambridge, closer to Kara's new school, walking distance to Dr. Booker's office. He established a routine: breakfast together, walk to school, work, pick up, homework, dinner, reading time. Normal. Stable. What Kara had deserved all along. And slowly, over weeks and months, he saw his daughter begin to heal. The criminal trials were scheduled for 6 months out. Lewis knew they'd be difficult. Cassandra's lawyers would still try the mental illness defense. Tony's team would argue he was just a boyfriend caught up in someone else's mess. But Lewis had one final card to play. One last piece of evidence that would seal both of their fates. And he was saving it for exactly the right moment. Chapter 7. The Reckoning. The criminal trial began on a cold morning in February, nearly 7 months after Kara had been found in that warehouse. She was healthier now. Her physical wounds had healed, and while the psychological scars remained, Dr. Booker reported significant progress. Lewis sat in the gallery as the prosecution laid out the case against Cassandra Knight. Child endangerment, fraud, forgery. The evidence was overwhelming. But Ronald Vaughn still fought. He brought back Dr. Conrad, who doubled down on the mental illness diagnosis. He brought in character witnesses who testified to Cassandra's kindness before her breakdown. He painted a picture of a woman destroyed by isolation and depression, not a calculating narcissist. And for a moment, Lewis worried it might work. The jury looked sympathetic. One woman in the front row was actually crying during Cassandra's testimony. Then the prosecution called Lewis to the stand. "Mr. Knight, how has your daughter's recovery been?" "Long, difficult. She has nightmares. Trust issues. She's in therapy twice a week. But she's getting better. And your relationship with her? Stronger than ever. I'm there for her now. Every day. Do you believe your wife's actions are the result of mental illness?" "Objection," Vaughn shouted. "He's not qualified." "I'll rephrase," the prosecutor said. "Mr. Knight, based on your knowledge of your wife over 7 years of marriage, did you ever see signs of mental illness before this incident?" Lewis thought carefully. "I saw selfishness. I saw someone who resented being a mother. I saw someone who prioritized her comfort over our daughter's needs. But I didn't see illness. I saw choice." During cross-examination, Vaughn tried to paint Lewis as a vindictive husband, but Lewis remained calm, factual, devastating. "You're angry at my client, aren't you?" "I'm angry at what she did to Kara. Angry enough to exaggerate? To lie. I don't need to lie. The evidence speaks for itself." The trial lasted 3 weeks. Tony O'Neill was tried separately, but his case was simpler. The fraud charges were ironclad, and Cassandra's testimony had destroyed his defense. But on the final day of Cassandra's trial, Lewis played his last card. He'd been saving something. A piece of evidence he'd kept from everyone. The prosecutors, Stewart, even Nelson. During a recess, he approached the lead prosecutor, a tough woman named Brenda Cooley who'd been skeptical of him at first, but had come to respect his methodical approach. "I have something you need to see." He showed her a video file, recovered from Cassandra's laptop by a forensic specialist Lewis had hired privately. The video was dated 2 days before Kara was abandoned. Cassandra, alone in her bedroom, talking to herself, or rather, talking to a camera like she was making a video diary. "I can't do this anymore. Every time I look at her, I see Lewis. I see the trap I'm in. Tony says we could have a real life together if it wasn't for Kara. He's right. She's always been the problem." A pause. Maybe if something happened. An accident. Lewis would be devastated, but he'd eventually move on. And I'd be free. Brenda's face went white. Jesus Christ. She was planning this. Not consciously, maybe, but the thought was there. This wasn't a dissociative episode. This was premeditation. "Why didn't you give me this earlier?" "Because I needed to see if she'd show genuine remorse. If she'd take responsibility." She hasn't. Every statement, every testimony, it's been excuses and deflection. She doesn't feel bad about what she did. She feels bad she got caught. If I introduce this now, her lawyers will claim it's tampered with. I had it authenticated by 3 separate forensic experts. Chain of custody is documented. It's real. Brenda studied Lewis with new wariness. "You've been planning this from the beginning, haven't you? Every move calculated. I told you on day 1. I was going to use the law. I was going to use evidence. And I was going to make sure she lost everything." When court resumed, Brenda requested to introduce new evidence. Vaughn objected strenuously, but the judge allowed it. The video played for the jury. The courtroom was silent except for Cassandra's recorded voice. Maybe if something happened. An accident. Lewis would be devastated, but he'd eventually move on. And I'd be free. Lewis watched the jury's faces change. His sympathy evaporated. The woman who'd been crying now looked disgusted. Cassandra sat frozen at the defense table, her face drained of color. Vaughn tried to salvage it, arguing the video showed mental illness, not intent. But the damage was done. The jury deliberated for 4 hours. Guilty on all counts. Sentencing was scheduled for 2 weeks later. Lewis didn't attend. He'd already moved on to the next phase of his life, the one where he was just a father, not a warrior in a courtroom battle. But he did submit a victim impact statement, which the judge read during sentencing. Cassandra Knight had every opportunity to be a good mother. She had financial resources, a support system, and a daughter who loved her. She chose, repeatedly and consciously, to prioritize herself over her child. The result was nearly fatal. My daughter will carry the scars of that abandonment for the rest of her life. No sentence will undo that damage. But I hope the court will send a message that children are not inconveniences to be forgotten. They are human beings who deserve protection, even from their own parents. Cassandra received 8 years in prison for child endangerment, fraud, and forgery. With good behavior, she'd serve 6. Tony O'Neill got 12 years for fraud, financial exploitation, and conspiracy. No chance of parole for the first 7. Lewis heard the news at Kara's school, where he'd volunteered to help with the spring fair. He simply nodded, thanked the prosecutor who'd called to inform him, and went back to helping Kara paint a sign for the bake sale. "Is it over?" Kara asked quietly. "Yeah, sweetheart. It's over." "Good. I'm tired of being the girl whose mom forgot her. I want to just be Kara again." Lewis hugged her tight. "You've always been just Kara. You've always been perfect." Chapter 8. The Surface. 6 months later, Lewis had settled into his new normal. His job with the local engineering firm was challenging but manageable. He worked from home 2 days a week, which gave him flexibility for Kara's appointments and school events. Kara was thriving. Her grades had improved dramatically. She made friends. The nightmares were less frequent. Dr. Booker reported she was processing the trauma in healthy ways. Lewis even started dating again, carefully, casually. Nothing serious. He wasn't ready for serious, and neither was Kara. But it was nice to remember he was more than just a father. He was a person, too. One evening, he received a letter from Cassandra. Prison letters had to be screened, but Dr. Booker suggested he read it before deciding whether to share it with Kara. The letter was different from her previous communications. No excuses. No self-pity. "Lewis, I don't expect forgiveness. I don't deserve it. But I need you to know that I finally understand what I did. Not just the abandonment, all of it. The years of resentment, the selfish choices, the way I treated Kara like an obligation instead of a gift. Therapy here is mandatory, and at first I fought it. I wanted to cling to the story I'd told myself, that I was a victim of circumstances, of mental illness, of your absences. But my therapist wouldn't let me hide. She made me face the truth. I chose this. Every step. I chose to pursue Tony. I chose to steal money. I chose to prioritize my wants over Kara's needs. And yes, I chose to leave her at school that day. Maybe I didn't consciously plan it, but some part of me wanted her to just disappear. That's the hardest truth to face. I didn't want to be a mother. I resented her existence because it limited my freedom. And that makes me a monster. I don't know if Kara will ever want to see me again. I understand if she doesn't. But if she does, someday, I want to be someone worth seeing. Someone who's actually done the work to change. I'm taking classes, working in the prison library, volunteering with a program that helps incarcerated mothers understand the impact of their absence on their children. It's brutal. Every story breaks my heart. And I think about Kara constantly. You were right to take her from me. You were right about everything. I'm sorry. It's not enough, but it's all I have. Cassandra. Lewis read the letter 3 times. He showed it to Dr. Booker, who analyzed it carefully. It reads as genuine, Elena said. But letters are easy. Consistent action over time is what matters. If she maintains this trajectory for years, maybe there's hope for eventual reconciliation. But Kara shouldn't feel any pressure. Lewis agreed. He filed the letter away and didn't mention it to Kara. Not yet. Maybe someday, when she was older and ready to decide for herself whether her mother deserved a second chance. For now, his focus was on building a life that felt stable and safe. He reconnected with old friends, started playing in a weekend basketball league, even got a dog, a golden retriever puppy that Kara named Anchor, which Lewis found both adorable and poignant. He also did something he'd been avoiding. He went back to the warehouse where Kara had been found. It was scheduled for demolition, and Lewis wanted to see it one last time. Not for closure. He didn't believe in closure, but for perspective. Nelson came with him. They stood in the dusty space where Kara had huddled, alone and terrified, for 30 hours. "You did good," Nelson said quietly. "You got justice. You got your daughter back. You didn't let it destroy you. I wanted to destroy her, but you didn't. You stayed smart. You stayed legal. You proved you were the better person." Lewis looked around the empty warehouse. She was 9 years old, Nelson. She thought her mother would come back. She waited in here, thinking any minute Cassandra would walk through that door. But you walked through it instead. You've been walking through doors for her ever since. That was true. Every morning, Lewis opened doors for Kara. Car doors, school doors, doors to new experiences and opportunities. He was teaching her that she could trust again, that not every adult would fail her. They left the warehouse and drove back to Cambridge, where Kara was at a sleepover with her new best friend, a girl named Melanie Travis who lived 2 blocks away. Lewis had vetted Melanie's parents thoroughly, perhaps too thoroughly, but they'd been understanding. They had kids too. They got it. That night, alone in his house for the first time in months, Lewis allowed himself to reflect on everything that had happened. He'd lost a marriage, but he'd never really had a partnership. He'd lost his maritime career, but he'd gained a present-tense relationship with his daughter. He'd been forced to rebuild his entire life, but the new structure was stronger than the old one. And Cassandra? She lost everything. Her freedom, her daughter, her reputation, her future. The woman who'd wanted to be free from responsibility now had nothing but time to think about her choices. Tony O'Neill had lost everything too. His freedom, his scams, his illusions of being clever. He was in a federal prison in Pennsylvania, far from the ocean he'd never sailed on, far from the women he'd manipulated. Justice, Lewis thought, wasn't always satisfying. It didn't undo damage or erase scars. But it was something. It was acknowledgement that what happened mattered. That Kara mattered. The next morning, he picked Kara up from her sleepover. She was chattering excitedly about the movies they'd watched, the pancakes they'd made, the elaborate plans she and Melanie had for their next adventure. "Can we go to the aquarium next weekend?" she asked. "Absolutely. And can we bring Anchor?" "Service animals only, kiddo. Anchor is a service dog. He provides emotional support." Lewis laughed. "Nice try." As they drove home, Kara suddenly got quiet. "Dad, yeah, I'm happy." Lewis glanced at her in the rearview mirror. Yeah, I know everything that happened was bad. I still have bad days. But mostly, I'm just happy." Lewis's eyes stung, but he kept his voice steady. "Me too, Kara. Me too." Chapter 9. The Horizon. 2 years after the trial, Lewis received a call from the prison. Cassandra had been granted early release due to good behavior and successful completion of multiple rehabilitation programs. She was asking for supervised visitation with Kara. Lewis discussed it with Dr. Booker, with Stewart, with Kara herself, who was 11 now and old enough to have opinions about her mother. "I don't know if I want to see her," Kara said honestly. "I'm not mad anymore, but I don't know what to say to her." "You don't have to see her if you don't want to. This is entirely your choice." Kara thought about it for a week. Then, maybe once, to see if she's different. The visit was arranged at Dr. Booker's office, with Lewis and Elena both present. Cassandra looked different. Older, humbler, without the polished veneer Lewis remembered. She was working as a clerk at a legal aid office, living in a halfway house, attending AA meetings despite never having had a drinking problem, just because, she said, the structure helped. "Hi, Kara." "Hi. You've grown so much. It's been 2 years. I know. I wrote you letters. Your dad said you weren't ready to read them. That's okay. I read one," Kara said. "The one where you said you were sorry. Did you believe me?" Kara considered this with the seriousness of someone who'd learned that words and actions don't always align. "I think you're sorry you got caught. Maybe you're sorry about the rest too. I don't know yet." Cassandra nodded, tears in her eyes. "That's fair. I don't expect you to forgive me. I don't expect anything. I just wanted you to know that I'm trying to be better. Not for a judge or a parole board. For me. And for you. Even if you never want to see me again. What's it like in prison? The question surprised everyone. Cassandra blinked. It's hard, but it gave me time to think. To realize how much I'd messed up. How much I hurt you. Do you have friends there? A few. Women who made mistakes like me. We help each other. Do you have a boyfriend? No. I'm not dating. I'm not ready for that. I need to figure out who I am without trying to be what someone else wants. Kara nodded. Dr. Booker says it called finding your authentic self. Dr. Booker sounds smart. She is. She helps me understand why people do bad things. She says sometimes people are hurt and they hurt others. Sometimes they're scared. Sometimes they just never learned how to be good. Which one do you think I am? Kara looked at her mother with those dark, serious eyes. I think you're all of them. The visit lasted 30 minutes. When it ended, Kara didn't hug Cassandra, but she did say, maybe I'll see you again. Maybe not. I need to think about it. That's all I can ask for. After Cassandra left, Dr. Booker asked Kara how she felt. Weird. She seemed sad. Like really sad, not pretend sad. Do you think people can change? Elena asked. I don't know. Can they? Some can. Some can't. Some change for a while and then go back. The question is whether you want to give her the chance. Kara looked at Lewis. What do you think, Dad? Lewis chose his words carefully. I think your mom made terrible choices that hurt you badly. I think she's paying for those choices and trying to be better. Whether that's enough is up to you. Whatever you decide, I support you. Even if I want to see her again, even then, as long as it's supervised, and as long as you feel safe. Kara decided to see Cassandra once a month. The visits were brief and sometimes awkward, but they were honest. Cassandra didn't try to buy Kara's affection or make excuses. She just showed up, answered questions, and listened. Lewis watched from the waiting room, and he saw something he hadn't expected, genuine change. Cassandra was quieter now, more thoughtful. She asked about Kara's life without making it about herself. She accepted boundaries without pushing. One evening, after a particularly good visit, Cassandra asked to speak with Lewis alone. Thank you, she said simply, for letting me see her, for not poisoning her against me. I told her the truth, what you did, why it was wrong, how it hurt her. But I also told her people are complex, that you weren't always bad. Wasn't I, though? Lewis considered. You were selfish, immature, narcissistic, but you loved her once. I remember when she was born, the way you looked at her. That was real. And then I buried it, under resentment and self-pity and stupid fantasies about being someone I wasn't. Yeah, I don't expect you to forgive me either. I don't know if I can, but I can accept that you're trying. That's something. Years passed. Kara grew into a teenager, smart, resilient, with a wicked sense of humor and a strong sense of justice. She played soccer, excelled in math, volunteered at an animal shelter. She continued seeing Cassandra, though the frequency varied. Sometimes monthly, sometimes not for 6 months. Their relationship would never be traditional mother-daughter. But it was something, a small, careful connection built on honesty rather than obligation. Lewis eventually did start dating seriously. A woman named Diana Hensley, the nurse from the hospital, who'd reached out years later to check on Kara. They took it slow, but it worked. Diana was kind, patient, and had no interest in replacing Kara's mother. She was just herself, which was enough. Tony O'Neill remained in prison. Lewis heard through Nelson that Tony had tried to con other inmates, gotten caught, and added time to his sentence. Some people never learned. On Kara's 16th birthday, Lewis took her to the ocean. They stood on the beach in Maine, watching the waves crash against the rocks. You know what's weird? Kara said, I used to hate that you worked on ships. I thought it meant you didn't want to be with me. I always wanted to be with you. I know that now. But back then, when Mom was being Mom, I thought maybe you left because we weren't enough. Lewis turned to face her. You were always enough. You were everything. I just didn't realize I was showing you by leaving. I thought providing was the same as protecting. I was wrong. You came back, though. When it mattered, you came back. And I'm never leaving again. Different kind of work now. Different priorities. Kara smiled. Good. Because I need you here. Not just when I'm in danger, but for the regular stuff. The boring parent stuff. I love the boring parent stuff. Liar. They both laughed. As the sun set over the Atlantic, Lewis thought about the phone call that had changed everything. The moment he'd heard your daughter was found unconscious and felt his world collapse. He thought about the rage, the planning, the methodical dismantling of Cassandra's life. He thought about justice and revenge and the blurry line between them. But mostly,